So very good day, good morning, good evening. With respect to your time zones, I'm not sure where are you joining from. This is the third day of the regional consultation on harnessing trade for faster recovery and sustainable development that is organized on the request of the Committee on Trade and Investment of ESCAP member states in preparation of the World Trade Organization 12th Ministerial Conference that will take place from November 30th to December 3rd in Geneva, given the circumstances and that are still evolving with respect to the COVID-19 pandemic. So today we are starting with covering a very important topic related to special and differential treatment in the disciplines of the WTO, and that of course is crucial importance for the development and trade linkages. So without further ado, I would like to introduce the moderator of today's session, that is Mr. Hafizur Rahman. He is a Director General of the WTO Wing, Ministry of Commerce of Bangladesh, and he is a good friend and partner of ESCAP Secretariat, helping us to promote trade in the context of development. And we are very thankful to him for taking this role. So, Mr. Rahman, the floor is yours, and please take over.
Thank you, Miyamiki. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all the experts, delegates, and officials from different countries, institutions, and different time zones. And you are welcome to our today's session on special and differential treatment provision and development and trade. The WTO agreements contain special provisions that give developing countries and LDC special rights, and which give developed countries the possibility to treat developing countries more favorably than other WTO members. These provisions are referred to as special and differential treatment provisions. These provisions include increase the trade opportunity of developing countries to safeguard the interest of developing countries, flexibility of commitments of action and use of policy instruments, transitional period, technical assistance, and special provisions for LDCs. There are 155 provisions with 183 entities in the WTO agreements, and among them 25 are specially for LDCs. Recently in the WTO, there is two trends of discussion. One submission from the LDC group for a 12 years extension of SNDT, use of SNDT after the graduation. And another trend is going on about the self-declaration of developing countries that they are developed and use of the SNDT provisions. Dear audience, we have two experts for today's session. First, I'd like to introduce Professor Jiang Kun Lu, the Managing Director of LEDECO, Geneva, a consulting institution specializing in providing high-quality services to universities and training institutions on education and training programs, and to companies and business associations on investment and business strategy and operations. Professor Lu is concurrently member of high-level board of experts on future global trade governance by Bertelsmann Stiftung, senior advisor of Shanghai WTO Affairs Consulting Center, committee member of senior advisors of China OBOR 100, and senior director of World Federation of Sports Course Industry. Professor Lu also acts as a senior research fellow and distinguished professor in several Chinese and European universities and think tanks, including China Society of WTO Studies, University of International Business and Economics of China, Wuhan University of China, and Sussex University of UK. Professor Lu worked as a diplomat and a trade negotiator on behalf of China in the WTO for a long time. He has published numerous articles in selected Chinese and foreign journals and had participated in the writing of some books on various subjects, including global governance, WTO, China's economic and trade policies, China's reform and opening up, and foreign relations. We have another distinguished experts, Professor Mustafizur Rahman. He is currently serving as Distinguished Fellow at the Center for Policy Dialogue, a leading think tank in Asia, South Asia. Professor Rahman served as an assistant professor at the University of Dhaka, at Department of Accounting and Information System. Professor Rahman did his master's in economics with distinction from the Kharkov State University, Ukraine, and PhD in development economics from Moscow State University, Russia. Professor Rahman has undertaken postdoctoral research at several reputed academic institutions, including University of Oxford, UK, and the Institute of South Asian Studies, Singapore, as a visiting fellow. Yale University, USA, as a senior Fulbright fellow, and Warwick University, UK, as a postdoctoral fellow. Professor Rahman has carried out research works in collaboration with a number of international organizations and institutions, including UNDP, UNCTAD, ESCAP, the World Bank, ADB, Overseas Development Institute, WTO Secretariat, Commonwealth Secretariat, European Commission, and the ILO. Mr. Rahman has published widely in professional journals, both in Bangladesh and abroad, and has authored numerous books and monographs in areas of interest and expertise. Mr. Rahman is a series editor of South Asian Economic Policy Studies, published by Springer, and member of editorial board of the Rising Powers and Global Governance. At different points in time, Professor Rahman has served as member of various important national bodies and committees set up by the government of Bangladesh. Before going to the experts, we'd like to give you some housekeeping information. Our experts will talk about 20 minutes. And after that, we'll allow comments from different governments and questions from different participants. For your information, that's the whole session will be recorded. And now I'd like to request our distinguished expert, Mr. Jiankun Lu, to deliver his speech on the issue. Mr. Jiankun Lu.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Rahman, and thanks to Mia for inviting me. Let me just put my screen, share my screen so I could start my presentation. Just hold on. Okay, thanks a lot again. Good morning from Geneva. Today, I'm most glad to share with you my personal view on one of the most important aspects of the ongoing WTO reform and also the WTO negotiations. So it's about the developed country status and special differential treatment. Of course, this is only, as I said, one aspect of the WTO discussions or negotiations on development. We have quite some other important aspects, as Mr. Ahmed has just said, that such as the proposal and the concerns of LDC and G90, which I understand that Professor Rahman, my co-speaker, will share later on. So just to very quickly go through the background of this discussion, that the development from the very beginning of the setup of the WTO has been one of the core objectives of the organization, as you could see from the WTO preamble, recognizing that there's a need to promote development, especially for developing countries. And of course, we all know that from 2001, the WTO launched its very first round of negotiations, the Doha round. Specifically, that round is named as Doha Development Round. The simple reason is that many developing countries, which accounts for 2/3 of the WTO membership, were very much concerned with these leftover of the pre-WTO system, the GATT system, especially in the last round of the GATT, the work round, that this so-called development deficit, which means that actually the increase and concerns of developing countries were not treated enough or were not treated in the same way as those of the developed countries. So there was a strong appeal that to put the interests and concerns of developing countries in the Doha round, the work program, which was faithfully reflected in the Doha ministerial declaration when the round was launched, and which was, of course, repeatedly repeated in later any WTO, the ministerial conference decisions, general council meetings, and all kinds of discussions, the specific issues under the whole Doha round. However, in recent years, especially since around 2008 and also, we see a very much evolving global economic and trade landscape, especially with the rise of emerging economies such as China, India, Brazil, and others. And then we see a shift, at least part of the shift of the discussion on development, which goes around whether a group of big developed countries, I mean, when we say big, is on the quotation, because later on you will see that this doesn't mean only big developed countries, it means quite a lot of developing countries. It asks the question that whether these big developed countries, which are more advanced in economy and trade, much more powerful than they used to be, are they still entitled to be developing country? And do they are they allowed to benefit, continue to benefit from special and differential treatment, which is of course a very important aspect of the WTO legal structure, which gives some privileges to developing countries on various aspects. So they ask this question, and they trying to deny the right of those countries the access to special and differential treatment, and even ask them to stop recognizing themselves as developed country. While on the other hand, all or most developed countries are still believe that the special and differential treatment is still an integral part of the WTO system, and self-declaration is a legal right which cannot be challenged. So you do see that on one hand, developed countries such as US and EU and others. On the other hand, you see China, India, and many other developed countries have totally different views on that. That has been one of the core discussion for the WTO negotiations, as well as, of course, the whole WTO discussion on WTO reform. In the WTO right now, who are developing countries who are developed? There's no legal, at least for developed countries, there's legal text which says that this is a list of developed countries. Actually, the developed countries very much self-claimed, which say that, like China, India, or Maldives, or Laos, which could simply say that I'm a developed country, and that's it. So it's very much a self-declaration. Except for LDCs that under the UN and in the WTO system, you do see a criteria which says that those countries have their per capita income below $1,000 they are LDCs. So the developed country is very much self-determined, and then accounts for 2/3 of the WTO membership. And of course, in the WTO system, if you go through very much various agreements, you will see that there are a lot of so-called special and differential treatment, as I said, which gives the developing countries the privilege to have some flexibilities to apply WTO commitments, or to have some policy space. The aim of those, of course, is to increase trade opportunities for developing members who are, of course, very much unprivileged in the WTO system. Taking LDC, for example, their percentage of goods or services are really very limited, below 2%, or for services even below 1%. Of course, we do know that there are 35 or 36 countries in the WTO which are recognized as LDCs. So those are the kind of different flexibilities of commitments, policy space for developed countries, and also some technical assistance, so on and so forth. And also we do have some specific provisions to LDC members. So coming back to what I want to say is that the question is, so what are these special and differential treatment, and how to apply them, and do we allow those countries to continue to benefit from the existing special differential treatment, or the new ones that have to be negotiated in the WTO various negotiations? So on one hand, let me just take the example of the US proposal, which has been in the WTO room for quite some years, which basically asks that under 4 criteria, so membership of OECD, or who are applying to join OECD. Number 2, members of the G20. I mean the big G20, not the WTO G20, the big G20, bigger and powerful countries, both developed and developing. And third is that member classified as high income by World Bank. And the 4th, member who accounts for at least 0.5% of global merchandise trade. So under this 4 proposal, which the WTO DDG Annabelle, when she was an expert in Peterson, she examined this, and she basically came to conclusion that there would be 37 countries which will be graduated from developed countries, which you could see the list there. You would see big countries like China, India, Brazil, and others. But on the other hand, you do see some quite, in our normal sense, quite vulnerable countries such as Antigua and Barbuda, and St. Kitts and Nevis, so on and so forth. So this gives a big rise to big concerns from those developed countries, which of course unanimously opposed to this criteria and its application. And of course, the US was not alone. As I said, that there was also proposals from EU and others, which also touches upon this issue. EU proposal was more or less along the US proposal, except on one thing. I mean, EU proposal was evolving, but in the beginning, the EU was very much like that, okay, we have to do a case-by-case verification. So it has to be based on needs, that we need to do a case-by-case review to see whether you need that, whether you need a special and differential treatment, and whether your needs miss that kind of give you the right, and then we need to discuss and approve, which of course was rejected by China and others. They don't want to put this exercise into a kind of beggar style that I have to beg to go to do this. And then, on the other hand, you see that from China, India, South Africa, and Venezuela, they have a big proposal, which actually goes totally to the opposite direction of the US and EU proposal, which is, of course, bluntly refuse the graduation mechanism, and then basically argued on the grounds of development divide. That they say that development cannot be simply characterized or defined by percentage of merchandise trade, cannot be defined by any kind of high income or low income. Development is a very comprehensive concept which has to be defined by many aspects, which means that industrial structure, GDP per capita, poverty, population, undernourishment, size of agriculture sector, so on and so forth. And also their developed countries, their disadvantaged position in the global value chain, always at the low end, so on and so forth. Of course, on that ground, they also absolutely reject this so-called absolute reciprocity, which means that if they are deprived of development country status, they would have to do reciprocity, which means that developed countries provide a kind of concession, and then at least those big or those countries which have to graduate, they would need to provide reciprocity. So the same level of concessions, which of course in their eyes are not grounded, well grounded. So the other hand is that other than this discussion on this, we do see a kind of a strong concern from G90, which encompasses almost all developed countries in the WTO, includes both the big developed ones and LDCs. They do emphasize this a lot on the so-called implementation issues, which is try to enhance or improve the existing proposals in the WTO system around various aspects, and of course, which needs to make them, as the Doha Declaration says, that make them more precise, effective, and operational, simply because those provisions are mostly based in Denver. So you would easily see legal language goes around that members will try their best, or members will consider to do so, to do this and that, and the members will make their best efforts. So which gives a lot of space for the, especially the committed developed countries, really not to apply these provisions or apply it not to the expectation of developed countries. So which gives a big rise, a big concern, give rise to the big concerns of the G90 countries. I will just mention this here. And then, so you will see that these two group of countries, developed countries, and then big developed countries, they are going to totally two extreme ends of the same line of issue. So where do we have a middle ground? How do we make them meet together? So then a few years ago, we do see a nice proposal by Norway, which is part of this Ottawa group headed by Canada. So basically, they made some very interesting proposals, which say that let's stop wasting time on the definition of development status. So who is developed country, who is not? Because this is useless. It won't come to any end. You won't define any meaningful criteria. And of course, this is also very much irrelevant to the degree of how much access they do have to the special and differential treatment, and also to the level or degree of their obligations, their commitments in the WTO negotiations. So they want to put this very much already politicized issue of developing country status aside, and then focus very much on the special and differential treatment. So that which defines the, as I said, the access to the privileges or flexibilities, and also which defines the level of commitments of developing countries, be it big or small. So they say that the special and differential treatment should needs to be decomposed into its constituent parts, and it must be need-based, and S&D should be enabling, not exemplary, which means that S&D should treatment should not lead to a kind of two-tier or several tiers of different levels of commitment. In their answer, the final target is always that every member, sooner or later, be it in short term, mid term, or long term, has to come to the same level. If you cannot do it, if you're not in a position, we give you transition period, we give you some policy space to adjust, to develop, until one day you think you are in a position to fully apply the commitments 100%, and then you do it. So that's the thing, not exempting, not really. There's some traditional special differential treatment say that, okay, I'm exempted from doing this and that, I won't do this and that. So that's also another thing. Technical assistance and capacity building to help those countries develop is also a part of this proposal. So from that, you will see there's a kind of a middle ground there. So very quickly to conclude to what I want to say. Right now, even this middle ground is proposed there. but we don't see that the countries are coming together. And there are some, of course, kind of new flexibilities demonstrated by some, such as if you look at the proposal by India and others on special and differential treatment, they did say that we will make appropriate concessions, which and make contributions to the negotiations, incommensurate with our development level. And China, in its WTO reform, also said that, well, we do encourage developed countries to make concessions or contributions to the WTO incommensurate with their development level. So you just see that these countries say that, okay, we'll do it, but we have to sit down and discuss it. But on the other hand, we, from developed countries, especially, of course, the US, we just see that transition of their government. So we don't know how Biden would be different from Trump. At least now we don't see any movement from their side. Other countries, more or less, I think that are coming close to the Norwegian proposal. So right now, the extreme is really like what I put here, two cartoons. On one hand, like the US, we should say that the US uncle Sam goes to a fortune teller, ask her that, can you tell me about my future? And then she basically said, yes, I can, but I cannot read Chinese. So which means that it's very much China, as an example of emerging economies, is very much the one who is powerful and who defines the future of the whole world and, of course, the WTO. But on the other hand, in our eyes of China, which says, okay, we are number 2 economy in the WTO or in the world, and we are very much number 1 trade in goods. But we do have some vulnerability, I mean, such as pollution, unbalanced economic development, and poverty, so on and so forth, low end of development of technology. And so that we're still vulnerable, and we cannot do the same thing as you developed countries do. So with these two extreme positions, it is very difficult to see how we could move ahead on any negotiations on the WTO. So to finalize my presentation, the conclusions from my eyes, and not only me, I also borrowed some of the views from my fellow colleagues in our think tank, the Friends of Multilateralism group, which have quite some interesting papers there, is really that, number one, stop politicizing development status and special differential treatment, and stop this static zero-sum thinking, because that won't go nowhere. And so you have to really be practical and sit down. So, and the other thing is that every member have and will get some special and differential treatment under quotation, which means that not only developed countries legally has access to special and differential treatment, but developed countries have enormous flexibilities in the WTO, which is not called special and differential treatment, but do give them a lot of flexibilities of policy space, not to apply the same level of commitments. Taking example, the very much famous discussion on WTO agricultural subsidies, and there are still a lot of countries, especially developed countries like US, EU, and Japan. They have privilege to apply big amounts. For the US is close to $20 billion each year on their sectors like cotton and others, which of course undercuts very much the competitiveness of naturally very much kind of advantageous countries, the Benin, Burkina Faso, and other Western African countries, which have very much low labor costs and other things, but they simply, because of that subsidy, cannot compete with the US or cotton or some other products from developed countries. So that is special and differential or flexibility is not only on for developed countries. There are many. So one way or the other, they have to negotiate this. And then, of course, special and differential treatment must be enabling, as I explained, should be dynamic, not permanent. This becomes a kind of not norm, but it becomes a trend in the WTO negotiations, such as in the trade and facilitation agreement, which actually the commitments are the same, but the flexibilities are more or more or less around when you can do it and how you can do it. So on the TFA agreement, which say that developed countries will have either transition period or they will be granted some technical assistance and capacity building, so as to bring them to the level. Of course, there, as I said, that China, India, and other big developed countries are not really using very much flexibilities there. They are, in a few years' time, they were applying the same level as developed countries. The fourth thing is that you need really creative thinking, because TFA is only one option, it's one pragmatic approach, which goes very well with the trade facilitation. But there are many other countries, such as ongoing fishery subsidies and other. How do you apply can you apply the same TFA approach, which is quite questionable? So you need to really be creative and to develop different approaches to apply in different negotiations. And the other thing, one size one fits all. It has to be really customized, especially in differential treatment. It has to be look at the capacity and so on and so forth, and needs of various developed countries, and to apply them to their specific needs. And last, going beyond development discussion, which is very much the whole, very much poisoned the atmosphere around and even beyond WTO, is that we do not see trust, not trust among big developed countries or the but also the whole membership, that we do not see the trust when we launched the Doha in the very beginning years of the Doha, when everybody was pushing for the same objective. Now the whole WTO very much is fragmented and going into different directions, and you don't see a kind of frank discussion in the WTO or even beyond the WTO. So that has to be corrected very soon. And this also have to be, I mean, development discussion has to be put under the big context of WTO reform, including decision-making, format of negotiations, I mean, plurilateral and others, which I think some other aspects have touched upon. But I think that as I said, to conclude, development discussion is under the whole context of the WTO reform, but also under the whole context of very much the global picture, that we do need to see a kind of a movement towards a more pragmatic, more concrete, and less politicizing, less geopolitical discussion. With that, I think we can move on this issue and also the WTO reform. So I conclude my discussion here. I thank you very much for your attention, and I will be ready to answer any questions afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Lian Kunlu. It was a very insightful discussion on current state of play in the WTO on a very important issues on SNDT in light of reform proposals submitted by countries and country groups. Professor Liu mentioned the different dimension of SNDT and how those submissions were argued by them. Dear audience, you are requested to put your questions and comments in the chat box also. Now I'd like to request Professor Mustafizur Rahman, Distinguished Fellow at the Center for Policy Dialogue, to deliver his speech. Professor Mustafizur.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I would like to express my deep appreciation to Dr. Mia Mikic and the organizers for this opportunity to share some of my views on a very important theme. I think this is very timely discussion. We are anticipating what will happen at MC12, which is going to take place in a couple of months. And I think Professor Lian Kunlu has very, I think, effectively set the tone for the discussion that we are having. But I think that I would like to complement what he has said. because special and differential treatment discourse has two dimensions. One obviously is the developing country dimension, which Professor Liu covered so excellently. But on the other hand, I think that there is a dimension from the perspective of the least developed countries. And I think that that also merits significant attention because there are 47 least developed countries which also enjoy special and differential treatment in the WTO. And also there are the added issue of graduating LDCs. So what I will try to do in the next 15, 18 minutes is to bring in the least developed country perspective, particularly the graduating least developed country perspective on the issues of special and differential treatment. I think this is important because a large number of countries are slated for graduation. And as Mr. Hafizur Rahman mentioned, there is also a proposal in the WTO General Council for extension of the SNDTs for the graduating LDC. So I think that discourse is also important and merits our attention. So what I will do is just a few words in the form of setting the context, and then with regard to the importance of operationalization of the SNDT provisions, where we have a number of concerns. What will happen if these are not there? This is specific SNDTs, and what support the these developed countries will need with regard to effective implementation and also extension. So that's how I have planned to discuss this theme. Now, we know that a large number of LDCs were slated for graduation. In 2018 review of the CDP, Committee for Development Policy of the UN, 12 countries were slated for graduation. Now, if you look at, between 1971, when the LDC group was identified as a separate strata among the developing country members of the WTO, we'll see that only 5 countries had graduated between 1971 and 2018, and with Vanuatu, as of now, only 6 countries have graduated. And now suddenly we have, in 2018, we have 12 countries which are slated for graduation. And one of the reasons was that although the GNI per capita was a moving average and that was kept like that, but the HAI was fixed at 66 and above, and the economic vulnerability index was fixed at 32 and below. These were moving averages before that, before 2015. So suddenly many LDCs became eligible with regard to the criteria of LDC graduation. So my first point will be that since the rules of the games were changed and many LDCs are becoming eligible for graduation, the discourse on SNDTs should also be crafted in a manner so that their concerns that so many becoming eligible should be taken into account. In the 2021 review of the CDP, we see that some of the countries like Timor-Leste and Myanmar were not recommended, but Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, they were recommended from our region, and Bangladesh graduation was deferred by 2 years, so we'll be graduating in 2026. Now, if we look at the number of SNDT provisions in the WTO 16 agreements, there are 183, and Patrick Lowe has done an excellent review of those. And we also have 25 LDC specific special and differential treatment. And these are provided in the form of, for example, the TRIPS transition period for the LDCs, which has been extended till end of 2032, waivers granted to the LDCs with respect to, for example, the services waiver for the LDCs, flexibility in terms of commitment with regard to, for example, the TFA, which we see for the LDCs group A, B, and C. We also see with regard to various subsidies, for example, agreement on agriculture, and also there are support under the EIF, Enhanced Integrated Framework, and also Technology Bank for the LDCs. So there are a number of LDC specific SNDTs in the agreements. And also if we expand the definition, the market access schemes of developed and developing countries like EU's Everything But Arms and other LDC specific schemes, these are also may not be directly SNDT, but these are also allowed in the WTO under the enabling clause of 1979. So together, these are the international support mechanisms, measures, ISMs, which are there. So once you graduate, the graduating countries will not be eligible for those. So the proposal submitted by the G90 for operationalization, and the three words that Professor Liu has rightly mentioned, meaningful operationalization of the SNDTs, and so these are very important for the LDCs. So we have a number of concerns with regard to the SNDTs. In various WTO ministerial meetings, decisions were taken which were not implemented. Let us recall the 2005 ministerial, Hong Kong ministerial, the duty-free, quota-free under the non-agriculture markets, the NAMA decision, the 97% zero tariff. The lists have not been given by the developed countries and developing countries willing to do so. With regard to GATS, the services waiver, we see that we have, on behalf of the LDCs, Nepal has submitted the request list. 24 countries have submitted their offer list, but we don't see the operationalization of the GATS waiver. Implementation of the SND, the Bali Ministerial Conference decision, the LDC package, there were concrete decisions with regard to the monitoring of the implementation. We haven't seen any concrete step. Rules of origin, the Nairobi Ministerial, 10th Ministerial, there were concrete decisions that these will be made LDC friendly. So we are graduating at a time when we see that many of the LDC specific SNDTs were not implemented. And that's where what Mr. Hafiz said, that the issue of extension, so that those which were there, we get some time. And we need these, because all these countries which are graduating, they're graduating under the shadow of the pandemic. So meaningful implementation of the SNDTs is very important for them and for other LDCs which will be also graduating. And this chart shows how the international support measures, what are there, and we see the SNDT, the market access, which are, as I said, under the broad rubric of support in the WTO, aid for trade. And we will have serious implications, and I will go into those when the SNDTs for the LDCs which are there will not be there, and also obviously the market access which will not be there. Now, I am not arguing that we don't want to graduate. LDCs like Bangladesh look at graduation with pride. But what we are asking is that it is the pandemic time. The pandemic is leaving a lot of negative footprint on the various criteria and sub-criteria, the sub-indicators of HAI, EVI. So they may need some extended period for this. And because there will be significant adversarial effects when these will not be there. So that's where the proposal of the extension really comes in. Now, for example, if we graduate, if we take the various agreements. In the agreements on, for example, the subsidies and countervailing measures, there are subsidies, subsidy measures which are there for the LDCs. But once we graduate, we cannot provide this type of subsidy for our industrialization under our trade policies. Agreement on agriculture also, there are a number of subsidies, and although there is a provision that net food importing countries, even if we graduate, we will be allowed some flexibility. Let us take, for example, TRIPS. Now, Bangladesh, for example, and other countries may cite other examples. We have benefited significantly from, for example, TRIPS and pharmaceuticals decision. 95% of Bangladesh's medicine needs are catered to by our own companies, and also we also export about $140 million worth to about 130 countries. So this flexibility which is been given under the TRIPS, not requiring to buy patents and license, etc., those will also not be there once we graduate. If we take, and particularly in view of the pandemic, obviously you can understand what happens with regard to TFA. Also, the once we graduate, the notifications and what we will have to comply with, all these will become onerous. If we take various support, for example, climate fund for the LDCs, after graduation will not be eligible. With regard to, for example, sanitary measures, we see that the share of co-financing will go up from 10% to 20%. So for the LDCs, there will be lot of implications not only in terms of what we'll be losing with regard to market preferences and SNDT clauses, but with regard to policy space and also the global space. In the policy space, domestic policy making and policy flexibility, many of those will not be there. Obligations and compliance with various obligations, those we will have to be more, we will have to implement. With regard to the global space, obviously, the terms of market access will be changing. Significant impact for countries like Bangladesh, which have been able to take advantage of the SNDTs and the market access provisions to a great extent. And also our relationship with our partners will be on the basis of not non-reciprocity, but reciprocity. So what I'm telling is that both in terms of our domestic space and in terms of our global space, there will be a lot of challenges that awaits us. But we are cognizant of the fact that we will have to participate in the WTO, and at this moment we will have to wear three hats. As an LDC, obviously we will be getting, for example, Bangladesh will be enjoying the LDC flexibilities, SNDTs for 5 years till 2026. We will be also have to keep in our mind the challenges of graduation, so that the graduation is smooth, is with momentum, and is sustainable. And our future as developing country, and as a developing country, obviously we will have to keep in mind what is happening with the Norwegian proposal, what is our concerns with regard to that, looking at future. So these three perspectives are guiding us. But right at this moment, what is of concern to us is that the graduating LDCs will need support. And the proposal which has been floated at the WTO GC. Now, the first point is obviously the pandemic, which has really undermined many years of success in graduating LDCs, in terms of income erosion, in terms of employment opportunities. So all this. Second is that although some may argue that there is no category as graduated graduating LDCs in the WTO. But what we are arguing is that we are seeking it as LDCs, which are going to graduate. So we are not telling that there has to be another separate group like graduating LDCs, because I hear it often in the discourse that there is no group like graduated or graduating LDCs. So this is one. The other is that we do have in the WTO some provisions which are extended for the LDCs after they have graduated. For example, the EIF facility is extended for 5 years after graduation of an LDC. The technology bank is extended, the support is extended for 5 years for graduating LDCs after they have graduated. We know that the European Union has extended the EBA for 3 more years after graduation. So we do have some precedents that there is enhanced support for countries after they have graduated. We also see that, for example, I was mentioning about the agreement on agriculture, and that there are provisions that even when a country graduates, but its per capita GNI in terms of 1990 is less than $1,000, they will be able to enjoy the SNDTs even if they graduate. So if their per capita income is less than $1,000 in 1990 terms. So there are precedences. And we have seen that when Maldives was graduating, there was flexibility with regard to trips which were given to Maldives as an exception. So that is the fourth point. The fifth point is that many of the decisions which I had pointed out a few minutes back, for example, the Doha Declaration, the Hong Kong Declaration on duty-free, quota-free, or the GATS services waiver, all these decisions were taken, but really after years of arguing, we didn't have the time. And now, once we graduate, we will never, these will not be operationalized and will not get. So what we are arguing, two things. One is the operationalization, and since we will be graduating, so that we can get a window of opportunity to take benefit from those. So that is also something. And another point I think which is not appreciated enough, which I pointed out, is that the HAI and EVI were fixed in 2012 and were operationalized in 2015, that it will be 66 and above and 32 and above. And suddenly, as I was mentioning, 50 years, only 6 countries graduated. And suddenly you have 12 countries which are eligible for graduation. Isn't it surprising? So I think that is also something that we should keep in mind. Now, to conclude, what I think that the proposal that has been submitted on behalf of the LDCs by Chad in the December 2020 General Council meeting, I think that it should merit serious consideration. Maybe that not for 12 years, but I think that a time which we can negotiate in, maybe 5 to 7 years, and this can be done through a waiver. I think there are precedences, so the waiver is the way to go forward, perhaps, because this support, as I was mentioning, is needed for smooth graduation and sustainable graduation. I think that we should also think that for these graduating LDCs, there need for international support measures, because we will have to consider that this is a very large number, 47 countries we are talking about at this moment. And these countries are also major markets of developed and developing countries. So if we can facilitate their development, there is also market access not only for us to the developed and developing country market, but also their market access is also facilitated. And all of us, we have deficit, global trade deficit. So who is really providing market access to whom? So I think that the MC12 is a very good opportunity for countries to come together. We are passing through a once in a century crisis. And I think that if we can be together, I think that it is win-win for all. let us not also forget that during the pandemic, many developed countries were pursuing protectionist policy. WTO has documented those. Some of these, they are coming out of that. So I think that to ask for operationalization of the SNDTs and to ask for extension of the SNDTs is something that I think is not illogical, and the LDCs, and particularly the graduating LDCs, in view of the current context, they deserve to have a separate discussion at MC12 and consideration by the ministers for the extension of the support that they are seeking, and a separate international support mechanism once they graduate. So there are many proposals. I know many skepticism in the WTO, but given the context and the large number of countries we are talking about, I think that this merits special and urgent attention. Thank you. Thank you for giving me, moderator, the opportunity to share my views. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Mustafizur Rahman, for insightful details on special and differential provisions under the WTO regime for developing countries and LDCs. You rightly mentioned the necessity of SNDT provisions for developing countries, and especially for LDCs, to support their economic development and to engage in international trade. You mentioned about the challenges of graduating LDCs and requirements for smooth and sustainable graduation from the LDC status. You also made it clear about the recent submission of the LDC group in the WTO to extend the SNDT measures for a period of 12 years after graduation. Also mentioned the issue of pandemic and meaningful operationalization of the commitments under SNDT. Thank you so much. Dear colleagues, now we like to go for comments from the government. First, I have a list of the government participants. Those are like to comment on the issue. First, I'd like to request Mr. Siang Hong, Director, Department of Notification and Legal Compliance, Kingdom of Cambodia. For you, the time limit is maximum 5 minutes. Please try to limit your speech within this time. Mr. Siang Hong.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Thank you very much, DG Rahman, for providing me an opportunity to say about the provisions. My statement is, as we are all fully aware, that the SDT is an unconditional right in WTO rules, and we must continue uninterrupted. The existing SDT provision must be upheld and be provided in current and future negotiations. We see that despite a significant progress achieved by LDC since the creation of the WTO, the global economic landscape has changed significantly in the 21st century. Hence, the new divide arises in economic transformation, such as the fourth industrial revolution, involving entirely new capabilities for people and machines. Therefore, it's essential to preserve the SDT for allowing LDCs members the space to formulate their trade policies in a way that helps them to integrate meaningfully into the global trading system. It is imperative to urge the developed and other countries to follow the agreed mandate of making SDT more precise, effective, and operational. You know, the current serious crisis for the multilateral trading system is by no means caused by special and differential treatment. However, without an equitable and sufficient fix to this problem in current and future trade negotiations, the chance to reach an agreement would be relatively small. So obviously, let's have a look at the 10 proposals made by the G90 group. They simply seek to provide stability, predictability, and transparency in the implementation of existing SBT provisions. But they were opposed and refused to discuss by the developed countries on differing grounds. As the SBT is part of the basic structure of the multilateral trading system. And abandonment of SBT would mean abandoning a core principle of the WTO agreement. So Cambodia will not support any intention or attempt to reverse the early gains made by LDCs in the GAP. And the next ministerial meeting may be on ongoing issues for discussion, when it include rules and other provisions governing agriculture, e-commerce, or fishery subsidies. Hence, LDC are in desperate need of specific SBT provisions applied to them, and capacity building and other assistance requirements should be contained in the agreements as well. Thank you very much. But before I end my intervention, can I ask a question to Mr. Lu first?
Sure, please.
Yeah, I heard that you're talking about some countries whose economy is larger enough, but still want to receive SBT. So I don't know, have the WTO had any approach so far to prevent the developing countries from still claiming the SBT? My question may be related to your explanation about a nice proposal by Norway, right? By Norway, but I don't know what is it about. But I could not hear your explanation clearly. So please.
Thank you, Mr. Sian Hong. I'd request our experts. Let's get all the questions, and it will be, I think, helpful to respond them all in a minutes. Now I'd like to request Mr. Omrit Lamsal, Undersecretary, Multilateral Trade Section, Ministry of Industries, Commerce and Supplies, Government of Nepal. Mr. Omrit Lamsal.
You'll have to unmute yourself, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Hafizur Rahman. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening based on the time zone. Respected Chair, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, eminent ladies and gentlemen. Let me start my intervention by congratulating ESCAP for organizing this consultation program at the Epargara 12th Ministerial Conference of the WTO. It's my honor to be the part of the meeting. It is the apt time to discuss on the common issues of multilateral trade among countries of the Asia-Pacific region to develop common understanding and views before tabling the agendas in upcoming MC12. I would like to thank Professor Mr. Lu and Mr. Rahman for the comprehensive presentation on SNDTs. There are more than 180 SNDTs provision under the WTO laws, and about 25 provisions are exclusively made for LDCs. However, the implementation status of such provisions is far below from the expected level. For instance, technology transfer under the TRIPS agreement hasn't been effectively implemented as per the spirit of the agreement. Likewise, the service waiver for LDCs is also not much effectively implemented. Even though around 50 countries have notified on the service waiver, the preferences have remained almost unutilized. There is mismatch between the collective request basket and preferences granted. In addition to this, LDCs can hardly make use of these preferences because of the cumbersome procedure and other technicalities to be complied with. WTO needs to work on it rigorously. More importantly, economies of LDCs are heavily reliant on the remittance. If you look at the recent data of the World Bank, around 77% of the total remittance of that in 720 billion USD in 2020 received goes to poor and middle income countries. If we take the example of Nepal, in Nepal, this share of remittance is in the national GDP is about around 24%. Yeah, currently semi-skilled labor is not included in the mode of trading services. But if we really want to, support the LDCs and bring them to the equal footing standard, we have to make some amendments in the provisions of the agreement. Developed countries need to increase their support in line with the commitment to address the supply side constraints of the LDCs. This support needs to be mobilized for developing trade-related infrastructure, connectivity, strengthen the value chain of the products and market access. This will enable for better integration in the regional and global supply chain. WTO needs to collaborate with other multilateral financial institutions such as the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank to invest in the trade-related infrastructure. Taking the strong backward linkages of MSMEs in employment generation and poverty reduction, MSMEs have proven their pivotal role in sustainable and inclusive economic growth. Along with the wake of COVID-19 pandemic, MSMEs have proven to give a relief to the hard-hit economy. I would like to share an experience of Nepal. The government of Nepal, in collaboration with the Association of MSMEs, is developing system for digital trade fair. It has two prongs objective, namely export promotion and the enhanced market access of MSMEs producers. How we can ensure preferential market access of MSMEs products in the international market, and how we can support or how we can strengthen and integrate them in the e-commerce system. We have to think on it. Nepal has firm belief in transparent and fair multilateral trading system, ensure equitable share in the international trade. So all the negotiations related to fisheries subsidies, agriculture, special and differential treatment, among others, need to be made conclusive while ensuring equitable benefit sharing to all members, particularly LDCs and LLDs. For the sustainable and irreversible graduation from LDC category, graduating countries need tailored scheme that to sustain their export performance. There is huge variation in the capacity of developing countries. This is need to be further categorizing, taking the size of the economy, export performance, and other macroeconomic variables into account. Customized preferential schemes and transition period, flexibility in complying with the specific provisions of international agreements, market access needs to be designed for those countries that have recently or they are going to graduate from the LDC category. In this regard, LDC Group's submission on trade-related challenges of the least developed countries and way forward, a draft MC decision that has been tabled to be considered very positively. With this, I would like to conclude my observations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Amrit Lamsal. Now I'd like to request Mr. Bilakse Bopa, Deputy Director, Multilateral Trade Division, Ministry of Industry, Commerce and Supplies, Government of Lao PDR.
Hello?
Hello.
Can you hear? Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Thank you to all speakers for your informative presentation. I would like to make some comments on my own capacity. Despite the notable economic progress made by many developing members over the past decades, the development divide between developing and developed members have not been bridged, and in some areas, they have even widened. Further, developing member continues to confront many challenges, which emphasize the relevance of special and differential treatment provisions. SDT result from a real difference in the level of development. It was a rightful and legitimate instrument for promoting development, which was enshrined in the Marrakesh Agreement. Special and differential treatment had been a constant that would provide the necessary flexibility to developing members, particularly the LDC, to address their development need and meet their development requirements. It also allows developing members to formulate their domestic trade policy in a way that helps them to reduce poverty, generate employment, and integrate into the global trading system. SDT should remain an integral part of all WTO agreement in the current and future negotiation. For LAPDR as an LDC, we are making steady progress toward graduating from LDC status and hope to reach a level of sufficient development to enable us to change our status. But still, in general, for all LDCs, graduation represents an important achievement, but not an end to itself. Countries that change their status continue to face development challenges and could fall back into the LDC category if their progress was not sustained, particularly during this global pandemic. Leaving the LDC category also means that graduating countries will lose access to the LDC-specific international support measures, which contribute to their socio-economic development. If not supported appropriately, the LDC transition would not be sustainable, and the graduation would make no difference. And incomplete and fragile graduation without specific support mechanism could lead LDC after graduation to more difficulties, in addition to the existing constraints they face at present. Therefore, support measures are needed for the period of time for a smooth transition. Graduating and graduated LDC still need technical assistance, preferential treatment, and trade-related support to avoid unwanted burden in the process. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Bilakse Baupa. Any representative from governments can raise your hand so that we can allow you to contribute your comments or questions. At present, I can see two hands. One from Hazard, another was from Kristen Hopwell. Okay, first Hazard and followed by Kristen Hopwell. Hazard, you can make your comment or question. Please be brief. Can you hear me? Okay, then let's go to Ms. Kristen Hopwell. Please make your comment or question.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And this is Kristen Hopewell from the University of British Columbia in Canada. I wanted to thank our speakers for their excellent presentations. My question is for Professor Liu. The issue of SDT for China and other large emerging economies has become particularly contentious in the context of the fisheries negotiations. I wanted to ask whether you have any sense of whether China is still seeking to claim SNDT in the fisheries negotiations, or whether we may be seeing more flexibility in that area. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen Hopwell, for your comments. And I have see text in the chat from Philippines. It has been done from Mary Sherilyn. It is written, the Philippines regard SNDT treatment as important principles in the MTS and WTO agreements, providing flexibilities for developing and least developed countries. We are open to discuss reforms in this area, especially on transparency and notification, and to further operationalize it for the benefit of developing and LDCs. On another note, in Professor Jiang Kun's slide 5, please be informed that the Philippines does not fall in any of the 4 categories indicated in the US proposal. We hope the slide can be corrected. Okay, this was the comment from Philippines. And I think Hazard is not raising his hand now. Now, if there is nobody for any comments or question, I'd like to request our experts. First, Mr. Lu to reply the questions, and if he has any comments on the commentators' comment.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think there are a few questions specifically asked for me. The first one is about Norwegian proposal on the developing country status and special differential treatment. Sorry, because of the time constraint, I couldn't go into the detail. Basically, Norwegian proposal, the first thing is that it's not a proposal which would operationalize in details how developing country status could be defined or what kind of special and differential treatment could be negotiated in any WTO negotiations. Instead, it is really a proposal trying to help resolve this, as I said, kind of two extreme ends, the polarized positions of, on one hand, US and EU and others, especially the US one, and then on the other hand, and China, India. The two sides, basically, the US, as you see from by what I shared, the US proposal is that based on criteria, a handful, 37, some countries would have to be graduated, and then you have to define a criteria to tell who are and who are not developed countries, which of course were opposed by China and also many other countries, even beyond this 37. So basically, Norwegian position was basically trying to resolve this is that developed country status is a political issue. You would see this from my humble paper, which Mia has shared through to the group, is that it's a political issue, not only for China, but also for others like Singapore in ASEAN. There are political considerations behind this. They cannot simply let go their developed country status. And also the other thing is that it's not practical to define any criteria, to develop any criteria to define who are and who are not developed countries. WTO is not about development level or developing country status. WTO is really about the level of obligations, the level of commitments, how much contributions you can make to the WTO negotiations on this and that subject, fisheries, e-commerce, and so on and so forth. So that is a very much practical and technical issue. So the Norwegian proposal is really to focus on that and sit in the negotiations, trying to see what needs they have and how do we match that needs with proper flexibilities for various developed countries. It could be different. Like in the TFA, I said China, India did much more than other developed countries, and they're almost at the same level as developed countries. So it could be customized and like that. So Norwegian proposal was really a kind of looking from that very much micro perspective on how to resolve this issue of polarized positions. Of course, I mean, the proposal itself said that for each and every sector, you have to go into negotiations to really define and case by case. So I think that's the right way to it. I hope this very much answer your question. About the Philippines, I have to go back and double check, but I remember this is very much based on Annabelle and some other experts really analysis on the criteria. And one thing I have to make it clear that the US proposal, which was tabled in February 2019, other than the full proposal, OECD, G20, World Bank, and then global trade merchandise, the US has one last kind of catch-up clause, which is say that nothing in this, the US proposal is a decision. So it say that the last catch-up phrase, which said, nothing in this decision precludes reach agreement that in sector-specific negotiations, other members, which means other members beyond these countries who would be defined as non-developed country, by the full criteria. So other country members are also ineligible for special and differential treatment. So this give concerns to give rise to concerns of many countries beyond this 37 that actually any country in future negotiations could really be deprived of special and differential treatment, which of course that they fiercely oppose. And also the other proposal the US tabled in which was also January 2019 on the so-called undifferentiated WTO self-declared development status risks institutional irrelevance. So in that proposal, actually, US listed a whole number of countries, much beyond the 37, as the analysts have done. Actually, Philippines were mentioned there 3 or 4 times in different aspects. That Philippines was also mentioned as an example to tell that these are not how to say the developing countries anymore. So I mean that I have to go back to really look at whether there's a mistake based on this 40-year Philippines should not be there, but I'll come back. But one thing, as you could see from the US 2 proposals, actually is not very much the Philippines away from any attention. So the last one on fisheries and special and differential treatment and China, frankly speaking, I don't have insightful information, but my personal, really even a kind of guess is that because I was representing China from the very beginning until 2014 when I quit my job on fisheries negotiations. So basically, China now is very much in a position to not to take upon ask for too many flexibilities for itself. I think China would be in a position to show more kind of responsibility in fisheries negotiation, but based on 2 conditions. 2 conditions. Number one is that because of systemic concerns, China will very much support meaningful and appropriate and very much operational special and differential treatment for all developed countries. I say for all developed countries, which means is a systemic principle. And of course, on the ground that what kind of flexibilities for various developing countries would have to be negotiated. As I said, that this is a systemic principle for China. Number 2, we know that fishery subsidies, how to say, the big providers are very much both developed and developing. Developed countries, you have EU, Japan, and Korea and others. And developed countries, you have China and to a certain extent India on some and others. So that which means that the whole balance should be there among the whole membership, especially between developed and developing countries. You cannot, China would not accept that while developed countries, by letting go some of the flexibilities on the special and differential treatment, while developed countries could continue to subsidize their fisheries. So I think that whole balance, if it is there, I think China would be very much in a position to do so. But if that comes to true, I'm not sure. I'm not inside anymore. So thank you, Mr. Moderator. I think you have answered the questions to me. But if I miss anything, please kindly let me know. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Loh. Thank you so much. Now I'd like to request Professor Mustafizur Rahman, if you have any comments.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I think that the statements and the comments made by our friends from Cambodia, Nepal, and now PDR, I very much agree with those. And you, Mr. Moderator, you will be perhaps getting insights with regard to the concerns that countries like ours have from their statements. For example, Nepal, Bangladesh, we are graduating now PDR. Cambodia will be graduating a few years from now. So the concerns are there, and as our friend from Nepal, he has mentioned, there was TRIPS flexibility, there was no technology transfer as such. We have seen that the aid for trade, the money allocated was very small. So we have a lot of concern with regard to the SNDTs. So operationalization, stability, predictability, meaningful implementation, all these are very important for us. And my observation with regard to the various proposals that have been submitted by the US and Norway is that we are seeing really we should look at it from the broader perspective of the attack on multilateral trading system in the WTO. And this is this concerns the systemic issues. This concerns the appellate division, appointments. This concerns the single undertaking, the principle which is there. So I don't think that the proposal by, for example, Norway, which talks about case by case dealing of what we need or what we don't need. That sounds very logical perhaps, but I think that once we go for case by case things, to that extent these countries will be very vulnerable to powerful countries. And identifying what we need, what we don't need. So I think that the provisions that are there under the various agreements, SNDTs, I think that's how we can implement those in a meaningful way. I think that debate, we should not be dissuaded from that debate. For example, let me, take fishery subsidies, which will be one of perhaps the deliverables at MC12. We might be having an agreement. Now, there are flexibilities for the LDCs. Now, if countries like Nepal and Bangladesh, for example, we will be graduating in a few years. So our problems of our artisanal fishing, our problems of our small scale fishing, the subsidies that we give to those. So all these are very important. These are not going away. You see, because our nomenclature has been changed from LDCs to a developing country. So I think that sensitivity, I think, should be there, as I was mentioning, and the development dimensions of the Doha round we have forgotten. And there is a development dimension of international trade. Let us not forget. And it's just not LDC is asking for something, as I was mentioning, that we are also importers. Our development is contingent on SNDTs, but at the same time we are also markets of the developed countries. So I think an enlightened view is what is needed. We are seeing a lot of attack on the multilateral trading system in the WTO, but I think that we should take a collective stand from the perspective of development and dimension of international trade, and we should not fall into the trap of various reforms that are being asked. Some of the reforms may be needed. We must discuss those, but I think that the interest of the LDCs and graduating LDCs should get the attention that they deserve. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Professor Rahman. Thank you so much. Dear colleagues, we are running out of time. We'll finish the session within a few minutes. For last comment from our two experts, the last takeaway, 1 minute takeaway from you, if you would like to comment. Mr. Lu first.
Yeah, thank you very much. Maybe just one comment to finish my presentation, actually, which I forgot to mention, and I very much actually thanks to Professor Hartmann for mentioning that when we focus too much on developing country status and who should have access to special and differential treatment, we easily lose focus on the bigger development picture, especially on LDCs and other vulnerable developing countries. That actually the development will never be away from future WTO negotiations, be it on WTO reform or be it on various subjects under the WTO negotiation. That the strong concerns of developing countries, especially LDCs, on this so-called trade development deficit is still very much vivid and strong as it was in about 20 years ago when the Doha round was launched. So I mean that any big players, be it US, EU, China, and others, while developing the development country status, could never, should never, and must never lose sight of that big picture without being resolved. I don't think that we could move ahead very meaningfully. So with that, I thank you very much for your attention. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Professor Loh. Now I'd like to request Professor Mustafizur Rahman. Sir, if you have anything.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I think that we had very good discussion, and my takeaway will be that let me tell in one sentence is that the graduating LDCs, as I said, Bangladesh particularly, we are very proud that we will be graduating. The 2021 CDP has recommended for 2026, and it was 2021 is a year where we are celebrating 50 years of Bangladesh and 100 years of birth centenary of our father of the nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. So this is a proud moment for us. But at the same time, what we are arguing is that in order to have sustainable graduation, the graduating LDCs like Bangladesh should have some window of opportunity given the pandemic and all the unfinished agendas of the WTO and the Doha round. And so we want to join the WTO as a developing country, obviously, as I was telling, and we will keep that perspective also in mind when we are talking and discussing the various issues will be there at MC12. But I think that the proposal that has been submitted for a window of opportunity to ensure sustainable graduation of our countries, that is something that the world community should carefully, I think, take into consideration and consider it favorably. So that will be my last takeaway, Mr. Moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you, dear audience. We'll finish within a few minutes. Thank you to our experts and those who commented, questioned, and contributed in the discussion on SNDT issues. The discussion was very lively and thought-provoking. You know, special and differential treatment is an inherent internal part of the integral part of the multilateral trading system, a fundamental rule in the WTO trade organizations. The current SNDT provisions in the WTO agreements were established through intense negotiation and compromises. The persistence of the huge development divide between the developing and developed members of the WTO is evident in different economic indicators. For LDCs, the SNDTs are crucial. Many LDCs could have achieved a level of socioeconomic development by using the preferential market access, flexible rules of origin, relaxed IPR, etc. The relaxed IPR for health sector also supported the LDCs to enhance life expectancy and health. Thus, graduation from the LDC status may drop the countries in an adverse situation all on a sudden. An ongoing pandemic also made it dire for those countries. We expect that the SNDT will not be looked through the prism of politics, but actual need of the developing countries and LDCs, and will get a level playing field and a decision in the upcoming MC12. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Now I like to hand over the floor to Secretariat and Mia Miki. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hafizur Rahman and our two experts, Professor Loh and Professor Rahman, for excellent exposition on the topic, and of course to our government officials and others that contributed their views and enhanced the understanding of the complexity of the issues. And we can only be hopeful that with all of us working together, we will get to some workable solution to this very important problem for the trade and development. So I thank all, and we will now be going for a break, and we will start the next and the last session of the regional consultation at 3:15 Bangkok time. Thank you so much, and see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mr. Hafiz. Thank you, Professor Lu.
Thank you, Mr. Professor Harman. Thanks, sir.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you. Thank you. Bharat Agna.
জি, স্যার ভালো থাকবেন।
Thank you.
So for the
Thank you,
next,
Mia. Thank you. Thank you.
thank you. Thank you so much. I'm just trying to connect to the next moderator. So
Okay,
Stephanie,
okay, thank you.
we will
Thank you.
have a break, and probably the staff will be showing some slides, and then we'll start at 3:15. So Jan, that's in 10 minutes actually. So Jan will then introduce you, and you will then take it over from him and go through the session. Fingers crossed that technology will not, give up on us. And Jan is here already.
Yeah, I see. So.
Right. Okay. Very good. Okay. So Jan, Stephanie is also here, and so I'll come back in 10 minutes before, or actually less than that, 9 minutes now. Okay. See you.
like this music and this countdown, right? So it's the first time we try it. Welcome to all of you to the last but not the least session of this regional consultation in preparation of the WTO Ministerial Conference at the end of the year. I hope you can hear me well. So this is a high-level roundtable on the way forward for the multilateral trading regime and role of regional cooperation. So really important topic. And for this, we have a very nice set of panelists. And we also have an excellent moderator, Mrs. Stephanie Honey, who is the Deputy Executive Director and Lead Staffer of this EBAC Business Advisory Council of New Zealand, and also Associate Director of the New Zealand International Business Forum. Actually, Stephanie has a long list of titles, but I think the most important thing I need to say about her is that she was a former negotiator trade negotiator for New Zealand. So she's really a trade expert. She's actually a trade expert. She's on the executive board of Trade Expert as well. This new group of women trade experts. And she's also co-founder of Global Trade Insights. So with those very few words of introduction, because we don't have lots of time, so let me ask Stephanie to move forward with moderating the panel. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much for that kind introduction, Jan. And it is a real privilege and an honour to be here. As you say, I am a former negotiator, and the WTO will always have my heart. So it's a great opportunity to have what I think promises to be a fascinating conversation for our audience tonight. So welcome to this roundtable, which is really designed to draw together the threads of the last 3 days of very intense and rich discussions. And as Jan said, we have a diverse and very impressive panel of thought leaders from around the region for you today, who are going to talk about the way forward for the multilateral trading system and the role of regional cooperation in that process. In short, how do we make the WTO fit for 21st century sustainable development? So I'm going to introduce our speakers shortly, and I'm going to put some questions to them. But at the end, we should have about 15 minutes for you to ask your own questions. So please do take that opportunity to engage with this stellar panel of leaders and thinkers from around the region at that point. So you'll be able to, as in previous sessions, put your questions in the chat, or officials, please do feel free to use the raise hand function, and I will give you the floor. So as Jan mentioned, our panelists come from a very diverse range of perspectives, which should give us a very rounded picture on these issues, I think. So we have speakers from governments, the NGO community, academics, and of course the business world as well. Because at the end of the day, although we are speaking very much about government perspectives in this conference, of course, it's not countries that trade, it's people and businesses. So it's great to have that perspective on these issues as well. So let me begin by introducing them. We're honoured, first of all, to have Her Excellency Mrs. Tekreth Kamrang, the Secretary of State from the Ministry of Commerce, Kingdom of Cambodia. Thank you. We also have His Excellency Mr. Domingos Lopez Antunes, the Deputy Minister of Trade and Industry from Timor-Leste, Mr. Shaheen Ali, Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of Commerce Trade and Tourism in Fiji, Mr. Ratnakar Adhikari, Executive Director of the Enhanced Integrated Framework, Mr. Peter Draper, Head of School of Economics and Public Policy at the University of Adelaide, Mr. Pradeep Mehta, Secretary General of CUTS, Ms. Hannah Nguyen, Deputy Director of the Digital Standards Initiative at the International Chambers of Commerce, and last but not least, a very familiar face to us all, of course, Ms. Mia Mikic, Advisor at Large from ArtNet. So without further ado, because we do have a very full program for this roundtable, let me start with you, Peter, if I may. And to get us going, in 5 minutes, a mere 5 minutes, could you please tell us what you would identify as the most urgent challenges facing the WTO that need to be tackled either at MC12, so in 3 months' time, or more broadly? So Please, Peter, you have the floor. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Stephanie, and thanks very much for the opportunity, and greetings to everyone. And so 5 minutes, I'll raise 5 issues, 1 minute per issue. So I think there are 4 big WTO-specific concerns that go beyond MC12. They are systemic concerns. And there's one big underlying concern, which is non-WTO specific, but has big implications for the WTO. So the 4 big WTO-specific concerns, in no particular order, because I think they're all big challenges. Special and differential treatment and how to manage the participation of developing countries in the system going forward, I think is an important issue. It comes up in every forum that I'm involved in. There are 2 underlying questions within that. Firstly, how to, from the standpoint of developing countries particularly, preserve their legitimate rights as well as existing balances in the agreements without creating new imbalances. But on the other hand, a core concern that we hear expressed by OECD countries in particular is how to manage potential abuses of special and differential treatment, or invocation of special and differential treatment where it's not necessarily warranted. And in relation to that, how to manage the free rider problem. In other words, big countries, dare I say China, one could think of others, that potentially take advantage of the invocation of special and differential treatment and in a sense hide behind it. So clearly these issues do need to be challenged. They're very intractable. We know that in the Geneva context, but somehow the system has to find a way forward and through them. The second big issue for the WTO system is the underlying and emerging contestation around what is a market economy and state capitalist systems. And again, one thinks particularly of China, but this is not just a Chinese phenomenon. If one thinks of Vietnam, for instance, some of our colleagues from Southeast Asian countries where the state is more involved in economic activity, and we could label those as state capitalist countries. So again, 2 issues related to this. One is that in certain cases, the WTO rulebook does need to be updated. One could think most obviously of the industrial subsidies discussion that is evolving in the WTO context, and connected to that, the role of state-owned enterprises in these state capitalist economies and the role they play in channeling industrial subsidies in particular. But there's also a need to develop new rules. We know this, for example, in digital trade, but also in services, where you find these market economy versus state capitalist issues emerging. That opens up another box, which is how to develop new rules, and that gets to decision-making modalities. And here I think it's well known, the big issue is plurilateral agreements, or the so-called joint statement initiatives, which I personally think is probably the only way we're going to see progress on the rulemaking front for the foreseeable future. But how to manage plurilaterals in relation to the need to keep multilateral agreements ticking over. And here I think of fisheries subsidies, for instance, which must be a multilateral agreement, but it's very difficult to find the points of convergence and get to that agreement. And the underlying big issue, I think, again, in relation to plurilaterals is how to accommodate developing country interests in those plurilaterals. And again, that gets back to the STT issue, but it also goes beyond that, I think. Finally, and I won't dwell on this because again, I think the issues are well known, the appellate body issue needs to be resolved, and it needs to be resolved yesterday. I'm not particularly optimistic that that's going to happen anytime soon, but if it's not resolved without the functioning appellate body, the dispute settlement mechanism we know is under severe stress. And then finally, the non-WTO issue that has big implications for the system, probably we can't discuss it yet, but it has to be mentioned, is our deteriorating geopolitical environment, and particularly the contestation between the United States and China playing out in many different ways. But one of those ways that has direct implications for the WTO is the growing fear of competition, I think, in not just the US, but in the OECD countries more generally, from China, from state capitalist countries, and the kinds of default protectionist responses you're seeing as a result. So we're seeing the US withdrawing increasingly from the system. Traditionally, it has provided leadership to the system. This has to be a big concern going forward. And the bottom line is the clock is ticking if we are to, in some ways, rescue the WTO system. So I don't want to understate the urgency of solving this problem.
Apologies. Thank you so much for those insights, Peter. That's a really rather a sobering list. Before I go on, let me just check with you. Would you see those issues needing to be resolved at MC12, or are some of those on a longer sort of time horizon, do you think?
I think they're all on a longer term time horizon. Yes, there are systemic challenges.
Very good. Well, that's certainly got our discussion off to a very thought-provoking start. So thank you so much for that, Peter. If I could now perhaps turn to Mr. Mehta. Mr. Mehta, CUTS has been working with the governments and the public and sector NGOs and businesses on promoting transparent and open trading systems. What would happen if we didn't have the WTO? What's the alternative as you would see it? You may be on mute, sir. It wouldn't be a modern webinar without at least one of those.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Good. I'm sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. Thank you, Stephanie, and greetings to all my fellow panelists in this particular thing. Let me begin from where Peter left, and I agree with him that there are a large number of systemic issues for which there has to be an understanding to work forward at the MC12 rather than to develop any kind of conclusive understanding. That's not going to happen. You have a new DG, you have a new US president, who anyway has now become quite a lame duck president in a sense after the Afghanistan fiasco. We were happy that, as against what Trump was doing to multilateralism, Biden came as a breath of fresh air. And let's not forget the fact that why I'm taking the US example is because they are a very key factor at the WTO in the sense how it is going to move forward. And therefore, what we see now is still a lot of uncertainties in the future. Yet, it doesn't mean that we need not work on these systemic issues. Peter spoke about SNDT. And the fact is that, we must understand the equity dimension in the WTO calculus. You have a very large number of developing countries which have in fact now gone down further after the pandemic. They are not better off as they were. And therefore, whatever transition time that we speak about in various cases would only help them in the event if the circumstances are normal. Circumstances are quite abnormal now. Many countries are witnessing negative growth. We have only two large, fortunately, the US and China, which are doing well, and they need to, pull up the whole economy. What was also mentioned that in terms of the trade prospects, both China and US are doing well, and since that in spite of even their bilateral trade is going up, in spite of the kind of conflict that we hear about all the time. But having said that, how do we ensure that most of you might remember that the Doha round was named as the development round to help the developing world, and what it turned out to be, two different animals to the Western world and the developing world. So there are still pains of that particular thing, which bothers a very large number of developing countries, including countries like South Africa from where Peter is, or India from where I am. And so, now, if you want a reform of the acidity treatment, and this is what I have also said often, is you have to look at the subsidy regime. Whether it is agriculture subsidies in the West or industrial subsidies in China, or whatever you have. And that, fortunately, I'm told by friends in Geneva that there is a study which has been mounted by the 4 intergovernmental organizations, and perhaps the OECD as well, in it, to look at the subsidy regime. And the WTO itself is going to take a closer look at the trade subsidy regime in that particular thing. And that should give us a substantial amount of fuel to take forward in future. Now, the point is that we may still end up in a kind of a stalemate. China will not budge, the West will not budge on agricultural subsidies, and they continue to enjoy their enforceable special and differential treatment. And as you know, I mean, what the situation is. But having said that, let me, with the limited time that we have, let me come to the conclusion that I had in my own thoughts. Now, we ran a series of webinars across the world last year as well as this year on a world without the WTO in order to get a better sense of things. The general consensus was that we need the WTO. So, I mean, there's nobody who said that we don't need the WTO, but we need the WTO which is functioning. And particularly the dispute settlement system is a very crucial factor in that. We don't know as to how it is going to roll out in MC12. I don't think there's going to be any resolution by MC12. Perhaps there might be a resolution to develop a resolution at MC12. Now, having said that, what did come out in our discussions was that we need a polylateral approach. A polylateral approach would mean where governments, the institutions, as well as the civil society work together on finding ways as to how to take forward the changing system rather than to depend upon governments alone. Now, secondly, the WTO rules work on certain economic considerations about members. So WTO should not be the forum, which is what US was also trying to point out in its earlier regime, that where it seeks to settle larger systemic issues between different economic models. Thirdly, the basic WTO rules already offer some flexibility and templates to reconcile different positions on sensitive matters like subsidies. There is a framework available. How to take it forward is at sea. Now, a better political negotiation effort can still lead to outcomes which are broadly acceptable across the entire WTO membership. I'm being very optimistic here. And any WTO reform has to be member-driven. Countries need to shed their their rigid positions and show greater flexibility. Greater political commitment to WTO reform is required from the major stakeholders. I mean, that is something which, as a mantra, needs to be said again and again. We all know, I mean, the WTO is an international public good. And so no one country has greater stake in it than any other country, any other member of this country. So therefore, in the same spirit, a WTO reform should not be undertaken at the behest of, say, one country or a group of countries. Now, even when we spoke about the plurilateral discussions which are going on certain issues, it doesn't have the whole membership. Now, fine, there is this whole phenomena of coalition of the willing if they want to take it forward, fair enough. But what we must understand is that it challenges the integrity of the whole system. And therefore, what we need to understand is that a well-functioning multilateral treaty system is in the interest of all countries. Thank you, Stephanie.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Mehta, for another very thought-provoking set of interventions. I guess perhaps one of the sort of core things that you've raised there is how do we build that trust to actually, or the political will to make the progress. So that's a really interesting dimension to this problem that maybe we can come back to in the questions later on. So thank you so much for that. I'd now like to turn, if I may, please, to His Excellency Domingos Lopez Antunes. Mr. Deputy Minister, we've just heard from our first two panelists a range of different concerns and substantive challenges facing the global trading system. And yet at the same time, your country is intensifying its efforts and really engaging in the process of acceding to the WTO. So could you tell us, please, why it is that Timor-Leste is pursuing this objective? Thank you.
Thank you. Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Yes, Excellencies, distinguished guests and participants. It is a great honor and pleasure for me to participate as one of the panelists in this high-level roundtable discussion on way forward for the multilateral trading regime and role of regional cooperation. On this occasion, I would like to share with you all about the Timor-Leste accession process to the WTO. In particular, the objectives for the membership, the challenges, and the technical assistance that are still required to push the accession process forward. As we all are aware, trade can play a critical role as an engine for growth and development. Although the current COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted people's daily lives and their economic activities, trade continues to play a critical role in addressing local food shortage, medical supplies, and other essential needs, and has a greater role in supporting the economic recovery and beyond. As a small island developing nation and a net importing country, trade is an integral part of our strategy for economic growth, job creation, and poverty reduction. We have adopted open policies for trade and investment since regaining independence in 2002. These policies are appropriate for a small island nation and continue to serve our economy and people well. We will continue to maintain the current open policy for trade and investment while pursuing institutional and legal reforms to improve our overall competitiveness. Accession to the regional and multilateral trading system will open up new trade and investment opportunities to modernize and diversify our economy beyond oil and gas and facilitate gradual integration of our economy into the regional and global value chain. We are also aware that the availability of natural resources is not the only variables to consider in investment and decision-making process. Sound domestic policy, good education and social services, functioning infrastructure, predictable rules, and enabling a competitive environment are also the critical factors in attracting investment. To achieve the above-mentioned policy objectives, Timor-Leste has been pursuing membership in the ASEAN, WTO, and the Economic Partnership Agreement between EU and the Pacific states under the African Caribbean Pacific Framework Agreement, which Timor-Leste is a member since 2005. For today's session, as per the agenda item, I will be focusing on the status of the Timor-Leste accession process to the WTO. Timor-Leste applied for WTO membership in December 2015 and was granted the observer status a year later in December 2016. The first working party meeting, which I was chair, was held in October 2020 last year, which is to examine and ask in detail about our foreign trade regime, clarify our initial response to the questionnaires, commitment for institutional and legal reforms, and readiness to open our market for international trade and investment, and technical assistance needs. The WTO Secretariat has been providing valuable technical support before and after the first working party meeting. The technical supports provided include development and revision of the Memorandum of Foreign Trade Regime, or MFTR, fatwa summary report of the first meeting, development of the initial market access offer for goods and services, and completion of other required negotiating documents. The second working party meeting was held in July this year. The members continue to examine our foreign trade regime, provide follow-up questionnaires, initiate the preliminary discussion on the initial market access offers for goods and services, and reiterated their availability to provide technical support. Currently, we are at the stage of initial bilateral consultations with several WTO members to follow up on the pending questionnaires, the initial approach to the bilateral market access offers, negotiation, and technical assistance needs. The third working party meeting is scheduled for early next year. We are fully aware that accession to WTO and negotiation will require a significant increase in Timor-Leste institutional and human resource capacity. Our institutional structures for formulating and implementing trade and investment policy are still at an early stage of development. We will need to strengthen our institutions, regulatory framework, intensify human resource development, and improve our overall economic competitiveness. The accession process not only requires trade-related domestic reform to comply with WTO rules, but also the capacity to negotiate and implement binding commitments on market access offer for goods and services. Accession processes are complex, which require strong teamwork and capacity in not only bilateral negotiation, but also the capacity to convince and get in political support from domestic stakeholders to introduce and implement the required structural reforms across many areas. We are aware that each bilateral negotiation is different. Managing the specific terms of market access negotiation on goods and services, keeping track of our national interests and trading partner interests, and existing bilateral or regional commitment is a challenging task. It is also a very demanding process, involves important and complex negotiations, intense engagement of negotiation and members with different strategy and interests. It is an immense task. To engage in the upcoming bilateral negotiations, we will require a specialized in-depth training course that focuses on trade in goods and services schedules. The procedural and technical aspect of the negotiation process involved, such as the interpretation of WTO legal framework agreements, consolidation of the completed bilateral negotiation into the final schedule of commitment, and etc. We are aware that as a least developed country, Timor-Leste has the opportunity to negotiate the terms and approach of entry to the WTO. In particular through the special and differential treatment provision for developing and least developed countries, and can access specialized technical assistance for pre and post-accession capacity development through the WTO's Enhanced Integrated Framework, IEF, the International Trade Center, and other interested development partners. Most recently, we conducted a needs assessment and capacity support workshop that identify areas that require further support to enhance technical readiness, be it in infrastructure, capacity building, or knowledge transfer, aiming at achieving our long-standing national priority of joining ASEAN. The technical assistance needs identified in the workshop will also support our accession process to the WTO and the Economic Partnership Agreement with the EU and the Pacific states. We are fully aware that there is no shortcut and easy path to the membership. There are substantive works that are still have to be done throughout the accession process. As we continue on this journey, we will count on the friendship and support from the development partners during our accession process and beyond. And we look forward to learning the result of this roundtable discussion on the way forward to enhance the multilateral trading system and regional cooperation. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Deputy Minister. A very challenging but important path that Timor-Leste is on there. Thank you for those remarks. Now, if I may, I'd like to turn to Her Excellency Mrs. Tekreth Kamrang, Secretary of State for the Ministry of Commerce of Cambodia. Your Excellency, we often hear that for low-income countries and LDCs, there really isn't much of an alternative to the WTO. Those economies are not often part of free trade agreements or regional deals and are obliged to resort to the WTO even in areas such as digital trade or some of those other plurilateral joint statement initiatives that we've talked about that might include more modern rules fit for the 21st century. So I know that you yourself have experience in leading the LDC group in the WTO. What's your perspective on the sort of options available for low-income countries and LDCs? You have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stephanie Honey, for your question. I'm delighted to be part in this roundtable discussion. And on behalf of my Minister, Excellency Pan Sosa, I'd like to give my thanks to Dr. Mia and to the ESCAP for inviting me to this discussion. Regarding to your question, I'd like to highlight that Cambodia recognizes the significance of WTO key principles, including open and predictable trade, transparency, non-discrimination, trade development, in ensuring an open, secure, and inclusive trading system. This rule-based multilateral trading system has laid a strong foundation for RDC and LIC to pursue their development interests, especially to integrate into regional and global supply chain through this system. While the regional and trade agreement (RTA) are currently at the center of many policy debates, which shape trade and economic relations, and these regional agreements are increasing in numbers and changing their natures, and might be more than around 80% of RDC involved in RTA negotiating, and or some already are party to the RTA. In many trade agreements today, negotiations go beyond tariff to cover multiple policy areas that avoid trade and investment in goods and services, including behind-the-border regulations such as competition policy, government procurement rule, intellectual property rights, and others. In general, RDC participating in any regional trade agreement always have firm position to adhere to the fundamental rule of the WTO, which all negotiating members have committed, while other developed countries demands much more beyond what the RDC and LIC can do. So as you already aware, special and different provisions for developing countries, including RDC, are contained in the WTO agreement. Therefore, we invoke WTO rule to back up our arguments and bargain for the interest of the RDC and LIC. In addition, RDC as a WTO member benefit from MFN treatment extend to all RDC members, and other important support measures such as technical and financial assistance through duty-free, quota-free, market access EBA granted by developed country to LDC. In this sense, we see that it is undeniable that the WTO continue to be the sole multilateral forum in which all members, including LDC, are on the level of playing field through its decision-making approach by the way of consensus. So, and for that, Cambodia has already been the strong support for multilateral rule-based trading system. And this rule-based multilateral trading system has been an affordable route for LDC LIC to pursue our interests individually or as a group and regarding the economic development. And I thank you. That's all my short comment. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that very interesting perspective. If I could now please turn to Mr. Shaheen Ali, Permanent Secretary from the Ministry of Commerce, Trade and Tourism in Fiji. Mr. Ali, Fiji's economy is clearly very strongly dependent on tourism and travel services. And obviously, with the COVID-19 pandemic, those sectors have seen some very significant negative effects. Clearly, the pandemic has affected all economies, but for those that are heavily dependent on some services sectors, people-facing services sectors, it's a particularly dismal picture. So we would love to hear how you see the path ahead, and in particular, what's needed to improve the trade regime for services in the direct aftermath of the pandemic, but longer term as well. Obviously, there's the Joint Statement Initiative on domestic regulation, but more broadly, what else is needed in that part of our trading system? You have the floor, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie, and excellencies to my esteemed panelists, ladies and gentlemen. Bula Vinaka, and very good evening to you all, or good morning, or good afternoon, as the case may be. And thank you very much for inviting us and listening to the Fijian experience. As expected, there has been extensive discussions on COVID-19 pandemic and the toll it has taken on global economy and the health systems for the past 2 years. It has affected all countries and economic sectors, and as you've noted, some more than others. So it is inherent in our nature as humans to worry about the most imminent challenge, especially when the challenge is a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic spurred on by a very novel virus. What we must not forget is that we have even a greater threat that plagues the world today and will do so in years to come. And it is, of course, exacerbated by the pandemic. Climate change poses the greatest challenge to sustainable development of our economies and for the economies in the Pacific to a point of existential threat. So the impact on Fijian economy by especially the second wave of the pandemic has been extensive. It has, like with other economies, closed our businesses, shut domestic tourism, which had kept the industry going with the borders being closed, has created a great deal of uncertainty all around. So in response, we had to move very quickly to lessen the impact on our people and especially the vulnerable communities. So in order to commence the recovery of the Fijian economy, apart from providing crucial unemployment support like most countries have done, our focus has been creating a new type of enabling environment to adapt to the new normal, so to speak, for doing business. And this comes together with improved digital infrastructure in particular and business solutions for e-commerce. Of course, it goes without saying that this helps the most affected businesses in the Fijian economy or any economy, the micro, small and medium enterprises. So let me get to the travel and tourism part. It will, as you note, be a key driver of our economic recovery. But cross-border trade has now taken on a greater role, especially in terms of economic diversification. There is an imminent need, though, to mitigate some of the increased costs that has been brought on by the pandemic on imports and exports. And of course, this has been made worse by the fact that Fiji and the Pacific are isolated and not directly connected to our key markets. So this is where we see the regional trade architecture play an important role in supporting the economic recovery of small island developing states. So regionalism and regional cooperation are important tools that we can fall back upon in the face of the natural tendency for countries to look inwards. So this is especially relevant, as I noted, for small island developing states like Fiji that face connectivity issues and distance from markets as a disadvantage. The regional architecture or instruments like RTAs have come into greater focus, but we're always seen as a stepping stone for small island developing states to venture into global trade. So we have our own regional agreements like the Pacific Island Country Trade Agreement and the Melanesian Free Trade Agreement that can enhance trading resilience in the Pacific Island countries and create economic opportunities beyond the region. It can also provide and encourage certainty for our investors as well. Regional cooperation is a powerful tool in combating the multidimensional impacts of COVID-19 and other ongoing challenges brought on by climate change. So there was some talk of plurilateral agreements and regional trade agreements and joint statement initiatives continuing to be negotiated. The WTO needs to review and establish fairer rules of these engagements. So in our view, there is an urgent need to relook at how development and provisions on special and differential treatment are negotiated and implemented and treated in the WTO. There, no doubt there's been a lot of discussions on this. These are long-standing and systemic issues in the multilateral trading ecosystem. However, we need to recognize that there are unique challenges faced by countries like small island developing states and LDCs, which warrants a more focused and creative approach. As small island developing states, we are faced with challenges such as very fragile and vulnerable energy and water grids, underdeveloped roads and marine network, poor internal and external connectivity infrastructure. And this also, no doubt, affects our ability to overcome barriers to market access and reducing our dependence on non-renewable energy and developing trading capacities. So the question is, what does the WTO of today should look like? It should, in our view, recognize these challenges and offer solutions that are not broad-brushed. Such an approach only leads to disadvantaging the already disadvantaged. So, there has been, in the session prior to this, focused discussions on S&D. It should be focused, in our view, effective and geared towards the unique needs of developing countries. Without question, we feel that the special and differential treatment provisions need to be preserved, strengthened in both current and future WTO agreements. However, as was noted before, these provisions need to be made more relevant, more effective for those who need it the most. In the era of economic and health stress that we are all under, the WTO must be fit for purpose for every member, and it must be seen to deliver fairness to all. A robust and sustained and inclusive economic recovery requires a fair, open, and predictable international trade, supported by a well-functioning world trading system now more than ever. So with this, Stephanie, I conclude my remarks. Thank you very much for giving me the floor.
Thank you so much. And it's really wonderful to hear a perspective of the small island developing state in this conversation as well. It's obviously a very important group that can sometimes be neglected in these big geopolitical discussions. So thank you so much for those insights. I'd like now to take us in a slightly different direction. Mr. Mehta talked about the need for a polylateral approach, and in one of my other roles in the APEC Business Advisory Council, we love to talk about the multi-stakeholder approach as well. And in that kind of spirit, I'm very pleased now to be able to invite our colleague from the International Chamber of Commerce, Hannah Nguyen, to take the floor. So Hannah, if I may put a question to you now. Digital trade is often seen, and indeed has been identified by a number of our speakers tonight, as offering major potential opportunities for both small businesses, but also for smaller economies as well. But unfortunately, of course, it's an area where trade rules are very fragmented. So what would you say are the prospects for developing global rules? And I guess, you know, more practically, what's needed to help equip businesses, especially MSMEs, to actually succeed in this more digitalized world? Thank you. You have the floor.
Thank you, Stephanie, for the great question. And on behalf of the ICC, I would like to thank the organizers for allowing us to bring the world business perspectives to this meaningful dialogue. So looking at the fragmentation of trade rules in the digital space, we should not underestimate the role of the e-commerce JSI in reducing that complexity that you just mentioned. And in fact, to Prof. Peter Draper's point, as we begin this conversation, I believe that we have on hand the single greatest opportunity to reduce fragmentation in digital trade policy development. And why do I say that? Because since the launch of the Davos in January 2019, we have seen the number of WTO members involved in this e-commerce JSI growing to 86 members. And this now represents over 90% of world trade. So I believe that we have finally the critical mass at the table. And as we have heard from some of our colleagues on day 2 of this program, the negotiations have already delivered some important wins for industry. For example, we have heard about clean articles on e-signatures, e-authentication, e-contracts, and transparency. Of course, we still have on the table a whole suite of measures being negotiated at the e-commerce JSI. And these are various issues such as how to reduce the cost of transportation of the physical goods via e-commerce, the disciplines of cross-border data flows, and where are the locations of the computing facilities. So no doubt these are very different issues. They need to be negotiated, they need to be ironed out over, but I'm optimistic about the prospects of a successful negotiation because negotiators now have access to tools which were not available before. So 2 of these tools that I'd like to highlight today are actually the Digital Policy Alert, as well as the OECD's Digital Trade Inventory. And after this, I'm going to go ahead and just put some of these links for information for our audience right in the chat box. But the reason why I highlighted these 2 tools is because they are publicly available to every policymaker, and they serve to increase the understanding of not only the differences, but more importantly, an increase the appreciation for a remarkable list of similarities in approach across jurisdictions. And I believe that on this firm foundation, countries can start to reduce and narrow the gaps and build consensus. At the same time, it is also clear that not all issues affecting our MSMEs today can be addressed single-handedly by the e-commerce JSI for digital trade. And to give you one example, last year, in 2020, the percentage of bills of lading for ocean trade across the world, which were issued electronically, was only 0.1%. Yes, the number is 0.1%. That sounds really disappointing because it is. And this is after 22 years of effort, innovation, and a pandemic of a lifetime, as Mr. Ali has mentioned earlier. And the reason is because outdated legal frameworks continue to hold back adoption of digital trade solutions. And as long as most jurisdictions continue to demand for transferable records in paper format, the traders will have no choice but to continue to rely on a paper-based process. And only the largest trading players can afford to sign up to the multiple platforms for digital workaround solutions. This is, of course, obviously out of reach for the majority of our MSMEs. And what this means is that they will continue to be excluded from the efficiency gains of trade digitization, unless we all decide to do something differently. So this is the reason why we have been calling on all governments, and we continue to call on all policymakers to create an enabling legal environment for the use of electronic trade documents for digital trade. Most fundamentally, by adopting the UNCITRAL model law on electronic transferable records, or MLETR, as most people call it. So to conclude, I think that from ICC's vantage point as the World Business Organization, we believe that our best opportunity to develop global rules in digital trade lies in the e-commerce JSI, and the success of that negotiation will be critical to reduce fragmentation. But that alone is not enough, and we need governments around the world to actually enable a regulatory environment that is friendly both abroad and at home. This is because trade and digital trade are truly borderless. And one of the most important reforms that we are advocating is this UNCITRAL model law on electronic transferable records. And it will be critical to actually enable our NSMEs to be set up for success in this digital age. Thank you, Stephanie.
Well, thank you very much, Hannah. A real call to action there. And of course, the UN ESCAP has, or this region has recently, put in place its own treaty on paperless trade. So there's a really great model that could be deployed in that space as well. So thanks so much for those interesting comments and something really potentially very enabling for small businesses and developing economies. Now, my next question, if I may, is to Mr. Ratnakar Adhikari, and from the Enhanced Integrated Framework. And if I may, Mr. Adhikari, your organisation, of course, is working on assisting LDCs to really be able to take advantage of these trade opportunities created by the WTO system, or the multilateral trading system. But we've heard a lot over the last few days about the JSIs and other plurilateral formats developing new rules. So how do you see the picture for those that your organisation is involved with in trying to help them to embrace this more fragmented trading system through plurilaterals? You have the floor, thank you.
Thank you very much. What I would like to focus on is to adapt the EIF in the evolving trading landscape. Not necessarily about the plurilateral, but I'll probably touch upon that as well, but other aspects as well. So thank you very much. And good afternoon and good evening, Asia Pacific. And thank you, ESCAP, for the opportunity. And it's timely in the run-up to MC12. ESCAP has maintained the tradition of organizing these kind of events prior to every ministerial conference. So in the interest of time, I would like to make 2 points. One, the first one is that EIF has been providing targeted support to LDCs to enhance their benefits from the multilateral trading system. Just a few examples that all came across during the previous presentation also. It's one of them is to help LDCs to accede to the WTO. WTO access and support is something that we provide extensively. And then We also enhance the capacity of LDCs to participate in negotiation and implement the outcome of negotiation. And finally, in order to take advantage of the opportunities, as you rightly pointed out, Stephanie, in your question, we help them to address supply side constraints, and results have been clearly visible because 10 LDCs have been or are being supported in their accession journey, and the Vice Minister of Timor-Leste mentioned this. But then, in the past, we've supported countries such as Laos, PDR, Yemen, Afghanistan, and Liberia. Currently, we are supporting 6 countries, and these include Comoros, Djibouti, Timor-Leste, Somalia, Sudan, and South Sudan. So that's an ongoing effort. Second, because of our intervention, these countries, LDCs, particularly enterprises in LDCs, have been able to access global market, and there are 159 new markets that the LDCs have been able to access through our support, and around 400 actions have been put in place in order to support policies and legislation in LDC so that they could effectively participate in the multilateral negotiation and multilateral fora. And over 13,000 micro, small, and medium enterprises have been supported, and 56% of the total beneficiaries of the EIF are women. Now, this brings me to the second point, how the EIF will adapt to the evolving trade landscape. EIF so far has proven to be agile. Just provide 3 examples. One is in the context of COVID-19, we were one of the first organizations to develop the business continuity plan and also to help countries to develop their business continuity plan. We helped them to repurpose the resources such as in Rwanda and Myanmar, and we established partnership with various other international organizations in order to provide support to LDC so that they were able to address some of the critical challenges that they faced because of COVID-19. The other area where we have adapted relatively quickly is the area of regional trade. And we have actually promoted a regional modality to support a number of countries, particularly in order to help them to enhance their regional trade, connectivity, and whatnot. And there was this mention of paperless trade. I actually found this very interesting. We supported UN ESCAP to help 4 LDCs to implement paperless trade regime. And this is something that we are also showcasing next month. And then we are also providing e-commerce training to women entrepreneurs in South Asia. So that's the kind of regional approach we've taken. But beyond Asia Pacific, we've actually followed a slightly different approach in the context of Africa, particularly by supporting the least developed countries in the continent to prepare their national implementation plan. And for this, we are collaborating with UNECA. And the third area where we've adopted is the area of digital trade. This was not a part of the design of the EIF right from the beginning, but I just want to show the example of the agility. What we've started doing is to providing support to least developed countries through UNCTAD to conduct e-trade readiness assessment. And 9 such assessments have been supported, including 5 in Pacific Island countries. As a result of which, we have been able to strengthen their institutional and productive capacity in countries such as Cambodia, Bhutan, Rwanda, and few others in order to take advantage of the opportunity of digital trade. So these are the few examples. And another area, which is also emerging area, and Permanent Secretary Ali mentioned this very clearly, is the area of climate change. And we are already adapting to this in the sense that we have recently launched a project together with the Overseas Development Institute to bring the trade and climate communities together to have common views and common understanding, because both of these are, global public goods, and they could be resolved through only through multilateral action. So in the context of MC12, and this is my final point, within the second point that I was trying to highlight, is that EIF plans to organize a session to focus on how aid for trade can be adapted to serve the needs of the LDCs, and to also implement some of the decisions that are going to be made at MC12, whether those are in the area of fisheries, in the area of vaccine, or in the area of any JSI. If it so happens, we would be there to support the LDCs. So with this, I end my remark, and thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Adhikari. Those are really important points you've made, not only to help the countries of the economies, but also within those each economy to also try to help different groups that are, in need of enhanced assistance, whether MSMEs or women, because of course it's one thing to open the door with a trade system or trade rules, but if the businesses can't walk through that door, there's a wasted opportunity there. So thanks so much for those comments. And that brings us to our last, but certainly not our least, panelist. I'm delighted to now invite our very familiar, well-known colleague, Mia Mikic, to the floor. And Mia, I guess in the spirit of trying to bring together some of the threads of the discussion so far, we've heard a lot of views from these preceding 7 speakers on the direction and depth of the reforms that might be needed in the WTO, and some challenges around identifying what those needs are, and then also how to actually make progress. But something that hasn't really been talked about a lot is an area that you have recently co-authored a book on, feminizing the WTO. So could you please tell us a little bit about that and how you see that fitting into this broader reform effort?
Thank you, Stephanie, very much. Just one small correction. It wasn't a book, it was a chapter. It was a chapter in a book that actually Simon Evanet and Richard Baldwin edited under the title Revitalizing Multilateralism, Pragmatic Issues for the New WTO DG. And it was actually done in anticipation of the appointment of the new DG last year. So the book was published in October, prior to knowing actually that that we will have Dr. Ngozi as a head of the WTO. But I really like what you said in terms of making sure that businesses will walk through the door that is that we try to open, and it's very, very important that part of those that will be entering through the door are women. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk a little bit about that, because so far I haven't actually heard the women being mentioned specifically. Apologies if it was, but I tried to listen carefully. So I think some will still try to believe that just by appointing a woman as a head of one of the multilateral organizations that is the keystone of governance of international trade, we have sorted out all the issues that we might have had or do still have with women and trade, or with the gender equality. Yet my co-author Vanika Sharma and myself have only taken that as a very small sort of step in the right direction, but definitely not a leap. And we still find quite a bit of ground to be covered in order to make up for all the inequalities and the issues that are still remaining with respect to women and trade. And I'm not talking about women in trade, because often people are, when talking about these issues, are drawn to actually focus on women in trade or in trade policies, particularly with respect to their position in those jobs related to decision making on trade policies or trade, whether it is in international organizations, governments, corporations, etc. We do realize very painfully that the gap between the genders in holding these positions is huge. I actually tried to number the woman ministers of commerce or trade, or ministers responsible for trade in Asia Pacific, and I had difficulty actually to go beyond 3 with respect to even including vice ministers. But so the gap is there, but I don't want to talk about that, even though it is very clear that there is a correlation between or even causation between the number of positions held by women in that leadership, decision making, influencing role, and the progress that is made with respect to actually pursuing how trade and trade policy, trade rules can improve the women's economic empowerment, the social balance, and their role in our societies. So let me turn to what in this little time to what we have actually tried to do in the chapter. So we tried to look at how the current functions of the WTO as the only multilateral trade system that we have, and the rules that it has built, how these functions are actually being used by the members in their promotion of women's economic empowerment. And so we looked at the existing literature that reviewed, for example, through monitoring and reporting function of the WTO, the normal trade policy reports, the TPRs of the member states, as well as 6 monthly trade monitoring reports that the WTO has been issuing through since the global financial crisis. And so what we have discovered in that portion was that a number of countries actually do pay attention to the importance of gender responsive trade policies, yet the instruments that they rely on are very often just incentives, financial or indirect incentives, for example, through the government procurement, but very rarely they belong to really the core trade policy making. And while we realize that there is a difficulty in defining really how to do that, we still think that that further canvassing of through those reports that members have to submit can bring out even more details on what is going in that area, and perhaps to discover very importantly through the COVID period whether there were any changes. My initial sort of guess on that, having looked at some documents, is that actually through the COVID we had lesser attention paid specifically on women's positions in those areas. Now, when you look at then the other function, the negotiating function of the WTO, cynics will say, well, there is nothing to look at because WTO was not negotiating on anything, so there were no texts to look at. So the literature actually uses the parallel system in opening the markets and looks at the preferential trade agreements that countries have been negotiating. And there we have found that number of countries, unfortunately not so many in Asia, particularly among the developing countries, have resorted to negotiating separate chapters on talking about economic empowerment of women and about gender responsive trade policies. However, many of these are just phrased in terms of sort of best endeavor. Very few are put in. There are some, but very few in binding language. And so we have actually then looked at all of that and tried to figure out what would be steps that can be taken. And very quickly, I'm aware of the passage of time, so don't worry. I'm just going to be reading our recommendations very quickly. So. And then I will make a reference to the actual change in the program of the WTO after I read this. So what we have recommended is that that countries somehow push towards making impact assessment of changes in their trade policy, including through the FTA, is mandatory. And we thought naively, perhaps, that Article 24, which talks about harm should not be done to the third parties, and then if we take that spirit and figure it as a harm should not be done through trade policy changes to half of the population on average, then perhaps we can talk about the way how this can be made much more present when we ratify and proclaim some agreements, consistent or not with the overall rules on paper or in spirit. We thought about putting more enforcement language into the provisions that are done, whether this will be done as separate chapters in these plurilateral or FTA agreements, or whether WTO wants to negotiate a separate agreement on that. We prefer to have actually chapters and the language in each agreement, and we currently are working on the research looking at how GIS taking this gender responsive sort of new program in onto their agenda, negotiating this. And apart from investment, I don't have much other proof that is being taken on board concretely. We want also, and thank you, Ratnankar, for mentioning aid for trade, but there is also big space there on how to make it definitely responding to the needs to empower women with respect to their position in trade area and trade policy area. And the last one is technical assistance that is always talking about enhancing skills among government negotiators, analysts, other stakeholders. And of course, we need to be here very pragmatic and understand that it is not always possible to enhance the skills of women if the governments are not putting forward these. But we can organize programs, and ARTNET has been very active in that regard, in really focusing on how to reduce this balance, imbalance between genders in terms of intake for the capacity building. Now, we have recommended that before knowing, because the draft was done before the informal working group on gender and trade was established, and the program has been talked about in more sort of public way. So I just want to say that again, that while the Buenos Aires MC11 has brought in several sort of declarations on movement with the joint statement initiatives, including e-commerce, including facilitation of investment, etc., women and trade was one of them. The others have moved on very swiftly. Yesterday, we talked in a session about the really great progress in investment, e-commerce, etc. Yet it took until late September 2020 to even put in place the informal working group on trade. They have adopted the work program, and I am very happy to actually say that what we were recommended is very close to what that current program is reflecting in terms of learning abilities, sharing knowledge, being more transparent, enhancing technical assistance and trade assistance, right? What is missing from that program is really that core area in terms of negotiation and enforcement. So hopefully something will be done in that area as we move on. It is a good news that the co-chairs of the informal group are very ambitious, so they are preparing the text for the joint ministerial statement for the MC12, and that may see enhancement and perhaps enriching of the work program that is currently adopted there on women and trade, and hopefully we will see much faster progress in that area. So I will come out with the results of new research, hopefully before MC12. But thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about this issue, because it is close to my heart, but also very close to the economic successes of many of our economic partner member states and economic partners. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thanks, Mia. I think that's a really important point that's not always well digested, that these issues around women's economic empowerment, it's not just because it's the right thing to do. There's a very strong sort of business and economic case for getting that right as well, isn't there? Now, we have unfortunately a short window now only for questions from the audience. So without further ado, may I invite any officials who are in the audience, if they have questions. It's a fantastic opportunity to grill this amazing panel of thought leaders. So please raise your hand, or I'll see if I can see that part of the technology. Feel free to raise your hand. There are a couple of questions in the chat. I myself have a few questions as well, which I will take the opportunity to ask if nobody else wants to have the floor. But please, I invite audience members to officials to raise their hands if they would like to ask a question. Well, while you're contemplating the most tricky question for our speakers, allow me then to turn to one of the questions that's in the chat. And this is from a colleague. I apologize in advance for my terrible butchering of your name. Pam Tan Nga has asked a question about transferring technology for producing vaccines. Is that, the question asks, a good solution to promote trade to get back to normal post-pandemic? And in fact, if I could perhaps broaden that out a little bit further, one of the things that we haven't heard our panelists talk about is, I guess, for want of a better shorthand, pandemic trade policy. So there are a range of issues that are currently being discussed to do with whether it's supply chains or the TRIPS waiver or the Trade and Health Initiative. Maybe I could invite any of our panelists to respond either to that question of technology transfer for vaccines or any of those other sort of pandemic related initiatives. How important is it to make progress on those for MC12 or for the world?
May I?
Please go ahead.
Yeah, Stephanie, this is a great example of the inequity that I was talking about. Now, we already have a precedent on TRIPS and public health in Doha 2001 meeting on the issue of AIDS drugs. And that gives us a very clear direction as to what happens when there is a public health emergency. What will prevail? Will intellectual property rights prevail, or will equity prevail that should be made available easily? Now, vaccines is not as easy as even the AIDS medicines is. There are so many components involved in it. There could be value chain IPR issues which also need to be dealt with. It is under discussion, and we hope that there would be a good resolution as soon as possible. But to remember the fact that this is something which we need to understand as a very substantive and a fundamental issue of the international trading system, that it should allow, it should fulfill the basic principles of prosperity everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Would any other panelists like to comment on these sort of pandemic related issues?
Stephanie, if I can. Sorry.
Oh, please go ahead. And then Peter, I'll ask you to jump in as well. Go ahead, Permanent Secretary.
Sorry, I agree with Mr. Mehta. You know, vaccine equity was seen as a challenge, given the complexities that have been related to vaccine research, manufacture, and distribution, and they each have complex value chains. But we have been like the Fijian vaccination strategy has been quite successful, with 97% of our population receiving the first dose and about 53% of our population receiving the second dose are fully vaccinated. This is perhaps so that we saw vaccination as the only sort of panacea to start or recommence travel and tourism, which was sort of fundamental to our economic recovery program. We are very grateful for global initiatives like COVAX and development partners like Australia, New Zealand, India, and US also coming to our assistance. And so access to vaccination for Fiji has not been a problem. Although we do support, the proposals that are on WTO with regards to TRIPS. But I think what the pandemic has made us realize is that we are only as strong as our weakest link, whether it's in the region or in the multilateral sphere. And we are not safe until everyone is safe, because this, the virus is so perverse in that way. And so we are quite heartened as far as Fiji is concerned, the global solidarity towards vaccine equity. Now we need to see the same level of commitment and solidarity towards trade equity as well in the wake of MC12. Yes, so those are my short comments.
Okay, thanks so much. And then Peter, we're running short on time, but if you'd like to add any quick thoughts. No, okay. Look, we have one further question in the chat, but may I just ask if any officials on the call would like to ask a question, if you'd like to raise your hand physically or electronically. Okay, I apologize if I'm not seeing you, but I don't think anybody has their hand up. So our final question is from Somesh Mathur. Again, apologies for my terrible pronunciation. And the question Somesh asks, paraphrasing here, what are going to be the deliverables from MC12? And so maybe I could combine sort of a final few moments of this roundtable by inviting responses either to that question, what will we actually see coming out of MC12, with any sort of final soundbite, final takeaways that each of our panelists might like to share. What should our audience be taking away? What is MC12 looking like, and more broadly, what is the message? And maybe if I might start again with you, Peter, love to hear your thoughts on both of those points. Thank you.
Well, I would hope there would be a fishery subsidies agreement. Still holding thumbs for that. But also a more parochial concern, I guess, in a way, that the structured discussions on trade environment would lead to the launch of a new plurilateral. We've particularly been working on trade and circular economy. And I think that's a very pressing issue, or building up to be a pressing issue. I don't think you're going to see much resolution in relate to carbon border adjustment measures. That's one of the big systemic issues that there needs to be some conversation around, obviously, in the build up to MC12 and beyond, but I don't think you'll see a resolution.
Great. Well, very heavy environmental flavour to your desired outcomes there. Thank you, Peter. If I may now invite Her Excellency Mrs. Tekreth Kamarang to share your 1 minute takeaway for us, or what you think might come out of MC12. Thank you.
Yes, like I mentioned that Cambodia strongly support the WTO as the multilateral-based trading system because of significant benefit, especially to the RDC. So for me, for Cambodia, we call on the WTO member to continue to support, contribute the negotiation process, especially to address the issue of WTO appeal on the situation effectively. So we need to work together to solve this issue. Thank you.
Great, very nice, clear. Thank you. And now, Mr. Domingos Lopez Antunes, what do you see as the sort of takeaway from this roundtable? Mr. Lopez? Yeah.
Yes, thank you. From our side, I think we have to maintain the special and differential treatment position at the MC12. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. And now, Mr. Ali, what's your takeaway from the perspective of Fiji for MC12?
Thanks, Stephanie. Like Peter, we'd also like to see a well-crafted fisheries subsidies agreement resulting out of MC12. But if I can take also a philosophical approach, I think that we have a new DG and we have this new conditions brought on by pandemic, but we also should have new energy, and we should not shy away from asking the hard questions or tackling difficult or systemic issues. So special and differential treatment, in our view, should be considered and made more functioning and efficacious if we take on the challenge of making it sort of more targeted to especially the small island states, small island developing states that are amongst the most vulnerable amongst us. And they face this dual threat of the pandemic and climate change. So if we can look at those development issues, ask the hard questions, and tackle the difficult tasks, there should be a good result for MC12. Thanks.
Great, thank you. And now, Mr. Mehta, if I could please invite you to share your 1 minute takeaway.
Thank you. Rather than takeaway, I'm only going to reiterate what I said earlier, that DG is new, this whole thing, and she's not a trade person, although she's smart, as a very good economist, and has been in multilateral organizations in the past. Her effort, what I can see is in order to see that the boat doesn't lock, and that there are resolutions adopted to resolve these problems, many of these systemic problems, which I and Peter spoke about in our opening remarks. There are systemic issues, and I agree with Peter that the issues. One is, the two broad issues that we are concerned with the MC12 will have to deal with are climate change related, which is, for example, the issue about trade and environment. And the second is the pandemic issue. The whole thing about public health and public order. This is coming up again and again. So we have to find some very permanent thinking, a permanent understanding on these issues, rather than to revisit reinvent the wheel again and again. I gave you an example of TRIPS and Public Health Declaration that gives us a framework to deal with the issue about COVID-19 also. So why is it that we are still struggling with some of these issues without understanding as to what happened? I was there at Doha, I was there at Marrakesh also. I've been through this whole mill for many years to understand. There are many new players who come, but the fact is that the text exists. If the text exists, so why don't we revisit them and see to it that we don't continue to My only one big problem, Stephanie, is that we are making the WTO a Christmas tree. Everyone wants to hang everything to it, and that is where there's a risk is that then it may just collapse under its weight. Thank you.
Okay, so sobering words there. Thank you, Mr. Mehta. Hannah, fantastic to have had a business perspective in this conversation. What is your takeaway for the audience?
Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you to all my fellow panelists. I think we spent 1.5 hours talking about trade and trade policy. So I'd like to take a moment to invite all of you to take your imagination to a very different place. Imagine you are in an emergency department of a hospital, right? And you have a patient right there. So do you think the doctors will give that patient a plaster? Or do you think the patients will be given the most effective treatment for the most critical pain point, right? So for far too long in this pandemic, as we have heard time and time again from our fellow speakers, MSMEs everywhere have been bleeding, especially because in this current trade system, they have not been prepared for success in this overnight digital first universe. And so what they need is fast, decisive, and coordinated action from governments as well as intergovernmental organizations. And I believe that the ability to agree on an effective set of digital trade rules in MC12 could be that crucial first step for our world leaders to take. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Very nice, clear message there. Mr. Adhikari, if you could give us your takeaway.
Thank you. Just two quick points. The first one relates to, I completely agree with Pradeep that vaccine equity and fisheries are important items, and then climate issue is also becoming one of the emerging priorities. But then do we really want to overload the WTO agenda? That's one part. But the second part, and this is a major takeaway, is that no matter what happens, I mean, we are really hoping for the best outcome, but at the same time, the way we are trying to help the LDCs is by addressing their supply side constraints. Even before, this is something that I should have mentioned earlier, even before the WTO had started talking about digital trade, MSME, women economic empowerment and investment issues, even before Buenos Aires Declaration, we were actively engaged in supporting least developed countries to address their supply side constraint, because we saw that these are the emerging opportunities where LDCs could take advantage. So I think what we should do is to follow a parallel approach. Of course, rule making is extremely important, but at the same time, addressing the supply side of LDC would be even more critical, and that's where we should invest our time and energy on, and at least from our perspective. Thanks.
Thank you. And Mia, any final thought from you?
Well, I was going to say something similar to what Ratnakar was talking about the importance to actually walk the talk yourself. Every member state should actually look at what they can do independently from any multilateral agreements and how to improve the trade policies, particularly when it comes to women, but also in all other areas, and to really make then multilateral or other agreements smoother and easier to do. But I would want to say that my hopes are that the MC12 will happen, and that actually will happen with some strong statements, not just ministerial statements, but actually agreed texts. I think it is crucial for the fisheries to be agreed on, because it would actually prove that WTO does have some teeth for negotiating capacity, but it is also crucial to move the pin on the talks with the appellate body. So that would be my hopes and my prayers for MC12. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mia, and thank you once again to all of our panelists for that amazing conversation that we've had, the great insights, and particularly those very pungent final takeaways. If I may use my moderator's prerogative, we're very close to being out of time, but just to perhaps bring the tone up into a slightly more optimistic mood. I think we've heard some pretty depressing thoughts over the last hour and a half. I guess one reflection that I've had is that, in fact, the WTO has often risen to the challenge of a crisis. I don't think anybody would disagree that we've got a pretty rich menu of different crises confronting us at the moment. And I guess I just feel optimistic that come November, the collective, global trading system and the member economies will recognise that we do actually need to take action, as you say, Mia, deliver something strong and credible that responds to the kind of rules-based trading system that will create the societies we all want to live in. So with that, thank you once again so much to the panelists and to our audience for your diligent attention over a very lengthy conference. And I pass the floor back to Jan to bring the proceedings to a close. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Stephanie, as a moderator of this session, and also to all the thought leaders, right, during the panel. Some of you have come to previous regional consultations before, right? So I think it's always good to see you and see also how the priorities evolve over the years. So it's very nice. So thanks again. I don't want to make too long a statement to close the whole meeting, but let me say a few things, right? You may not know that this regional consultation has actually been organized by ESCAP since establishment of the WTO, so it's not really a one-off thing. And the regional consultation overarching objective is really to support all the ESCAP member states to more effectively participate in the multilateral trade negotiations. So I really hope the regional consultations this year has been helpful in this regard. So as noted by the WTO DDG Annabelle in her presentation, so that's 3 days ago already, right? There are a large number of pending issues to be discussed at the forthcoming ministerial. So the regional consultation really focused on topics that are actively negotiated, like fisheries subsidies, agriculture, and also the joint statement initiative, right? E-commerce, facilitation of investment, small business, and also, but not only those, also some that are important for sustainable development and the COVID-19 recovery. So trade and health, trade and climate change, environment, and very importantly, special and differential treatment. So the discussion at the roundtable also focused on the broader WTO reform issues. So a lot of information and views were exchanged, and it's interesting to see the very varied priorities highlighted by different countries and delegations. Right? So still, let me try and point to a few takeaways and reflections from the discussions. So I'll be very brief, but I think there is no, everybody agrees, right, that there is no readily available substitute for the multilateral trading regime and the WTO, right? So there is a need for revitalizing and reforming the multilateral trading system. And so then the focus of the reform may be put in particular on increasing transparency, modernizing trade rules, and also operation of the appellate system that everybody values greatly. In the context of the COVID-19 crisis and the response, the new rules on subsidies, I think we mentioned, and the importance of digital trade seem to be, action needs to be taken in this area. Keeping in mind, and I really like Pradeep's mention at the very end, right? Not to make WTO a Christmas tree. I will use this again because I think this is happening to some extent, right? Unfortunately. Second takeaway or reflection is that resilient international trade and supply chain have been essential to recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic and the crisis, right? So pandemic is truly a global crisis, and so the first best solution is really global. So then the WTO is really part of the answer there. And the fact that it's been working with WHO, IMF, World Bank, and others is very welcome, but more cooperation across organizations is needed to facilitate access to vaccine and other critical goods. On the climate crisis, like the pandemic, it's also a global crisis. And so multilateral trade rules should support climate action with coordination needed with relevant UN organizations. So the COP26 will be meeting just a month prior to the MC12. And so it may actually have a direct impact on what may be discussed and agreed at the WTO ministerial. So this should be kept in mind. Trade and climate change linkages are very complex. We had a chance at ESCAP to work on this very closely for the past year and a half. And it really requires moving from a siloed approach to a networked and multi-level approach, right? So I think what this means for the WTO is WTO working closer together with the UN, and as well as bilateral and regional initiatives really feeding into global solutions, right? And then the last takeaway, or I think that came out of the discussion very clearly this morning, is that special and differential treatment need to be preserved and strengthened with a view to narrow the gap between developing and developed economies. So this was the most interactive session, at least that I could, the one I sat on, right? Most interactive session in the regional consultation. So beyond SDT, graduating LDC should be supported, and aid for trade and capacity building remains very important. And that should be really recognized in the forthcoming multilateral trade negotiations. I mean, above all, I think the development dimension should not be lost, right? So the development dimension of trade should remain accounted for, making sure the rules contribute to a more inclusive and environmentally friendly world. So all in all, and it remains to be seen what concrete outcomes will be achieved at the WTO MC12, and this was one of the very last questions asked by a participant in the roundtable. But it's really, I think we should really hope that there is some concrete results. So fixing the dispute resolution system will be a real achievement, but apparently most speakers find this quite unlikely, right, unfortunately. So reaching an agreement on fisheries would really be great. Great signal of the readiness of the WTO members to preserve the fish resource, yes, but also the entire multilateral trade system, right? So we can see some concrete achievements. As the ESCAP Executive Secretary Ibu Amida mentioned in her opening remarks, ESCAP has been contributing to the efforts on trade by building capacities of members, and we will continue to do so. So tomorrow we have a special capacity building session to introduce the different capacity building tools that we are making available, mostly online, for trade policymakers and negotiators. So you're all very much invited to join us and contact us further if you are interested in rolling some of them out at the national level through national capacity building activities and so on. So let me end here thanking again all speakers, all moderators, all participants, and also with a very special thanks to Mia Mikic, my former boss, who's now the ARPANET advisor at large, and with Ada Nukunwataka as well from the trade team here, who actually led the organization of the regional consultation, right? And we probably would not have achieved this without both of you. So thanks to the technical support team, also Ning, Pan, Nuchat, who ensured everything went smoothly. And so I wish everybody a great rest of the day, not a great rest, but a great rest of the day, and see you tomorrow for the capacity building segment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Oh. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was great to see you all on screen, and hope to see you in person, if, you know, next year maybe.
Yes.
Look forward to it.
Yeah. Okay, bye.
Bye.
Bye.